The elevator doors slammed shut just as Victoria Sinclair's hand shot out. Too late. Thunder cracked outside the glass tower, and the lights died. In the sudden darkness, Caleb Mercer heard her sharp intake of breath. Of all the people to get trapped with during a blackout, it had to be her. The CEO who'd made his life hell for the past year. The woman his sister had somehow tricked him into meeting for the world's worst blind date. And now they were stuck. Alone. 30 floors above the city, with a storm tearing the sky apart and nowhere left to run. If you want to see how a disastrous blind date trapped in an elevator changes two lives forever, stay with me until the end. And please hit like and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Caleb Mercer was already 20 minutes late, and he didn't care. He sat in his decade-old truck in the restaurant's underground parking garage, staring at the steering wheel like it might offer him an escape route. Rain hammered the concrete ceiling above, each drop echoing in the half-empty space. His phone buzzed for the third time. His sister Emma's name lit up the screen. He ignored it. The rational part of his brain knew he should just go upstairs, suffer through 90 minutes of polite conversation with whatever woman Emma had chosen this time, then drive home to relieve the babysitter. Simple. Painless. Over by 9:30 if he was strategic about it. But nothing about tonight felt simple. Emma had been weirdly insistent about this one. Secretive, even. She'd refused to tell him anything about his date except that she was successful and exactly what you need. Which meant absolutely nothing, because Emma thought everyone was exactly what Caleb needed. Last month, she'd tried to set him up with her yoga instructor. Before that, it was someone from her book club who collected porcelain dolls. Caleb pressed his palms against his eyes and breathed. He was tired, the kind of tired that sleep didn't fix. He'd pulled a double shift at the warehouse yesterday when Martinez called in sick, then stayed up until 2 in the morning helping Sophie finish a school project about the solar system. The poster board was still sitting on their kitchen table, covered in glitter and slightly crooked planet cutouts that Sophie insisted were perfect. His daughter thought everything was perfect lately. New shoes from the thrift store? Perfect. Cereal for dinner because Dad forgot to go grocery shopping? Also perfect. It was the kind of relentless optimism that broke Caleb's heart on a daily basis. Because Sophie shouldn't have to be that easy. She should be allowed to complain, to want things, to expect more than a father who was barely keeping his head above water. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. "I'm in the parking garage," he said before Emma could launch into whatever guilt trip she'd prepared. "Oh, thank God, I was starting to think you'd bailed. I still might." "Caleb, I'm exhausted, Em. I've got to pick up Sophie by 10, and I really don't have the energy for another—" "Just go upstairs," Emma interrupted. Her voice had gone strange. Careful. Trust me on this one. Please. Something in her tone made Caleb pause. Emma was a lot of things. Pushy, overly optimistic, occasionally oblivious, but she wasn't manipulative. If she was asking him to trust her, she actually believed this mattered, which probably meant it was going to be even worse than he thought. "Fine," Caleb muttered, "but you owe me. Big time." "Put it on my tab," Emma said, and hung up before he could change his mind. Caleb climbed out of the truck and headed toward the elevator, already composing the polite excuses he'd need to leave early. The parking garage smelled like gasoline and wet concrete. Somewhere above him, thunder rolled across the city like a warning. The restaurant occupied the entire top floor of the Apex Tower, one of those stupidly expensive places with floor-to-ceiling windows and a sommelier who probably earned more than Caleb made in 6 months. He'd looked it up on his phone during lunch. The cheapest entree cost $48. He was wearing the only dress shirt he owned that didn't have a frayed collar. The hostess greeted him with the kind of smile that suggested she could smell how little money was in his bank account. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "I'm meeting someone," Caleb said. "Not sure what name it's under. My sister set it up." The hostess's smile tightened. "I see. And your sister's name?" "Emma Mercer. Or maybe it's under my date's name. I don't actually know who—" "Mr. Mercer?" The voice came from behind him, and Caleb felt every muscle in his body lock up. He knew that voice. He'd heard it exactly twice in his life, and both times it had preceded a spectacularly bad day. The first was during a mandatory all-staff meeting 8 months ago, when the voice's owner had announced warehouse restructuring that cut benefits and increased quotas. The second was 3 weeks later, When Caleb had publicly challenged those cuts in front of 200 employees and gotten hauled into a disciplinary meeting. He turned around. Victoria Sinclair stood 5 feet away, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than his truck, and an expression that could have frozen nitrogen. For 3 full seconds, neither of them spoke. The CEO of Galway Industries was 30 years old and looked like someone who'd been genetically engineered to terrify corporate boards. She was tall, maybe 5'9" without the heels she was currently wearing, with dark hair pulled back in a style that was somehow both severe and elegant. Everything about her posture suggested control. No wasted movement, no unnecessary emotion. Her eyes were the color of winter storms, and right now they were staring at Caleb like he was a structural problem she needed to solve. "No," Victoria said finally. "Absolutely not." Caleb's brain was still trying to process what was happening. "What are you doing here?" "Apparently the same thing you are." She turned toward the hostess, her voice dropping into the clipped, dangerous tone Caleb had heard her use on executives who disappointed her. "Who made this reservation?" The hostess looked between them nervously. I'm not sure. Check your system," Victoria ordered. "Now." The woman's fingers flew across her tablet. The reservation was made by an Emma Mercer for a party of 2 at 7:30. Private table, prepaid. Victoria's jaw tightened. She pulled out her phone and made a call without breaking eye contact with Caleb. Someone answered on the second ring. "Diane," Victoria said coldly, "did you arrange a dinner reservation for me tonight?" "But so, we'll see our sad." Caleb couldn't hear the response, but he watched Victoria's expression shift through several emotions too quickly to identify. "I see," she said eventually. "We'll discuss this later." She ended the call and looked at Caleb. "My assistant set this up. Apparently she's friends with your sister." "Of course she is," Caleb muttered. "They thought it would be funny, I assume. Or they're both insane. That seems more likely." Oh. Thunder cracked outside, loud enough to rattle the windows. The lights flickered, but held. Caleb ran a hand through his hair and tried to figure out the fastest exit strategy. This wasn't just awkward. This was professionally dangerous. Victoria Sinclair wasn't someone you accidentally ended up on a date with. She was someone who fired people for sport and made million-dollar decisions before breakfast. And Caleb had called her short-sighted in front of half the warehouse staff. "Look," he said, "we obviously don't have to do this. I'll just—" "Mr. Mercer." Her tone stopped him mid-sentence. Victoria had that look on her face that Caleb recognized from the one disciplinary meeting he'd attended. The look that said she was 3 steps ahead and already calculating the optimal outcome. "We're both here," she continued. "The reservation is prepaid, and if we leave separately right now, our respective meddlers will consider this an unfinished experiment and likely try again." Caleb blinked. "You want to actually have dinner?" "I want them to stop interfering in my personal life," Victoria corrected. "The most efficient way to accomplish that is to prove this was a terrible idea, sit through one meal, and provide enough evidence that they'll never attempt this again." "You want to have a bad dinner on purpose." "I want to have a conclusive dinner," Victoria said. "Bad is simply the most probable outcome." Despite everything, Caleb almost smiled. There was something darkly funny about the whole situation. The CEO and the warehouse supervisor forced into a blind date by people who clearly had no idea what they were doing. It was like a setup for the world's most uncomfortable sitcom. "Fine," he said. "One dinner, then we never speak about this again." Agreed. The hostess looked relieved to have a resolution. She grabbed 2 menus and led them through the restaurant toward a private table near the windows. The view was spectacular. The entire city spread out below them, lights glittering through the rain. At any other time, Caleb might have appreciated it. Right now, he was too busy trying not to think about how badly this evening was going to go. Victoria sat down with the kind of perfect posture that suggested military training or years of etiquette classes. Caleb dropped into his chair and immediately felt underdressed. Everyone else in the restaurant looked like they belonged in a magazine. He looked like he belonged in a warehouse. Which, to be fair, he did. The hostess promised their server would be right with them and disappeared. Silence fell across the table like a lead blanket. Victoria opened her menu without looking at him. "Order whatever you want. I'm expensing this." "You can't expense a personal dinner. I'll categorize it as a team-building exercise. We're not on the same team." A cross-departmental relationship building initiative, then. That's not a real thing, Set. It is now. Victoria's eyes flicked up from the menu, and for just a second, Caleb thought he saw the edge of dark humor there. I have an entire department that invents corporate language. They'll make it sound legitimate. Caleb shook his head and opened his own menu. The prices made him wince. $48 had been the cheapest option at lunch. Apparently inflation had hit since then. You're doing that thing, Victoria said. What thing? Us. Looking at the menu like it personally offended you. I'm just trying to figure out how they justify charging $60 for chicken. It's free-range organic chicken raised on a sustainable farm in Sonoma and prepared by a chef with 2 Michelin stars. It's still chicken. Yes, well, that's the difference between eating and dining. Caleb closed the menu. I eat. I don't have time to dine. Clearly, that's... The comment should have been insulting, but Victoria's tone was more observational than cruel. She was studying him the same way she'd probably studied quarterly reports, cataloging information, looking for patterns, calculating outcomes. It made Caleb suddenly aware of how much she probably knew about him. Not personally, but professionally. She'd have access to his employment file, his salary, his performance reviews, the written warning he'd received after the restructuring incident. He was an open book. She was a locked vault. So, Caleb said, because someone had to break the silence, how does a CEO end up on a blind date arranged by her assistant? Victoria's expression didn't change. Diane has been with me for 6 years. She's efficient, discreet, and excellent at her job. She's also apparently developed opinions about my personal life that exceed her job description. Your assistant thinks you need to date more. Boatu. My assistant thinks I need to date at all, Victoria corrected. She's wrong, but she's persistent. And your solution was to actually show up? My solution was to show up, prove her wrong, and establish boundaries. Victoria paused. Clearly, I underestimated her creativity. The server arrived before Caleb could respond. She was young, polished, and wearing the kind of cheerful smile that suggested she was extremely good at pretending she couldn't hear awkward conversations. She rattled off the evening specials with practiced enthusiasm, recommended a wine pairing Victoria ignored, and took their orders with efficient grace. When she left, Victoria folded her hands on the table and looked directly at Caleb. Your turn, she said. My turn for what? To explain how you ended up here. I've shared my circumstances. Professional courtesy suggests reciprocation. Caleb leaned back in his chair. My sister thinks I'm lonely. She's probably right. She's been trying to fix it for 2 years with increasingly desperate setups. This is apparently her most ambitious attempt. She's friends with Diane? I guess so. I didn't even know they knew each other until about 5 minutes ago. They must have coordinated carefully, Victoria said, and something in her voice had shifted. Less ice, more calculation, like she was solving a puzzle. Diane managed my calendar. Your sister knew your availability. They would have needed to align our schedules without either of us noticing. That's kind of terrifying. That's extremely competent. Victoria picked up her water glass. If they weren't currently on my list of people to fire, I'd be impressed. You're not actually going to fire your assistant over this. No, Victoria admitted, but she doesn't know that yet. Thunder boomed again, closer this time. The lights flickered. Caleb glanced towards the windows and saw lightning split the sky like a broken bone. The storm was getting worse. We should probably eat fast, he said. I need to pick up my daughter by 10. Something changed in Victoria's expression. Not softening, exactly, but shifting. You have a daughter, Chapeau Khan. Sophie. She's 8. Your file didn't mention children. Caleb felt his spine stiffen. My file? Employment records, Victoria said, like it was obvious. Date of hire, position, salary history, incident reports. You read my incident reports. I read everyone's incident reports. It's part of my job. Right. Caleb tried to keep his voice level. So you know all about me, and I know nothing about you except that you cut warehouse benefits and ignore safety complaints. Victoria's eyes narrowed. I didn't ignore safety complaints. I reallocated budget to address the highest priority infrastructure issues first. Warehouse climate control was ranked fourth on a list of 6 critical needs. Tell that to the guys working overnight shifts when it's 95 degrees inside. I did, in a company-wide memo explaining the decision matrix and timeline for implementation. A memo, Caleb repeated. That fixes everything. It provides transparency and accountability, yes. It provides excuses. The temperature at the table dropped 20 degrees. Victoria set down her water glass with precise control, and Caleb recognized the look on her face. He'd seen it before. Right before she'd torn apart a facilities manager who'd tried to argue about loading dock protocols. Mr. Mercer, she said quietly, I have been CEO of this company for 3 years. In that time, I have increased revenue by 40%, expanded into 6 new markets, and reduced operational inefficiencies by nearly 30%. I have also improved worker safety ratings, increased average wages, and implemented the most comprehensive benefits package in our industry. So when you sit there and accuse me of making excuses, I would suggest you consider the possibility that you don't have the full picture. Caleb met her stare and didn't flinch. And I would suggest you consider the possibility that people aren't data points. We're the ones living with your decisions while you're sitting in meetings congratulating yourself on efficiency metrics. You think I don't understand that? I think you understand it as a concept. I don't think you feel it. Victoria's jaw tightened. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then she leaned forward slightly, and her voice went very quiet. You don't know anything about me, Mr. Mercer. You know my title and my reputation, and apparently a few decisions you disagreed with. But you don't know who I am, or what I've lived through, or why I do this job the way I do it. So I would appreciate it if you didn't make assumptions about what I feel. The words hit harder than Caleb expected. There was something raw underneath the ice, something Victoria had almost let slip before slamming the door shut again. He opened his mouth to respond, but the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the restaurant. Someone gasped. Glass clinked as a server fumbled something in the sudden black. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, dim and red-tinted, turning everything into shadows. Ladies and gentlemen, a voice called from somewhere near the kitchen, we've lost power due to the storm. Please remain seated while we assess the situation. Victoria was already on her feet. We should leave. Agreed. They headed toward the exit together, navigating through tables full of confused diners. The emergency lighting barely reached the corners of the room. Caleb could hear rain hammering against the windows, louder now, without the background music and conversation. They reached the elevator bank just as the restaurant manager intercepted them. I'm sorry, the man said, slightly breathless, but the elevators are offline. We're going to need everyone to stay inside until— How long? Victoria interrupted. I don't know. The building's backup generators should kick in soon, but should or will? Ma'am, I really can't— Victoria pulled out her phone and dialed. She held up one finger to silence the manager while she waited for someone to answer. David, it's Victoria Sinclair. I'm in Apex Tower and the power's out. I need a status update on backup systems. Pause. Now, David. She listened for maybe 10 seconds, then hung up. Generators are down, she told Caleb. Lightning strike damaged the system. They're estimating at least 90 minutes for repairs. Yes. Caleb checked his watch. Already 8:15. Even if the power came back in 90 minutes, he'd never make it across town to Sophie's friend's house by 10. He pulled out his own phone and called Emma. She answered on the first ring. How's it going? The power's out, and I'm trapped in a restaurant with your terrible matchmaking experiment. Can you pick up Sophie? Oh my God, you're trapped together? That's so— Emma, focus. Can you get Sophie or not? His sister sighed dramatically. Yes, I can get her, but you owe me details later. I owe you nothing. You did this on purpose. I did it with love, Emma said cheerfully, and hung up. Caleb shoved his phone back in his pocket and turned to find Victoria watching him with an unreadable expression. Your sister sounds delightful, she said dryly. She's a nightmare. As is my assistant. We should introduce them. They can form a support group for people who meddle in other people's lives. I think they already have. Despite himself, Caleb almost laughed. The absurdity of the situation was starting to override the awkwardness. Here he was, trapped in a powerless luxury restaurant with the CEO, who'd made his professional life difficult for the better part of a year, while a storm tore the city apart outside. Sophie would think it was hilarious. "So," Caleb said, "what now?" Victoria looked around the dimly lit restaurant. Most of the other diners had settled back into their seats, apparently accepting that they weren't going anywhere soon. The servers were distributing candles and apologizing. "I suppose we wait," Victoria said. They made it maybe 3 steps back toward their table before the building shuddered. It wasn't an earthquake. Caleb had felt those before. This was different, a deep grinding sound that came from somewhere above them, followed by a massive crack of thunder that seemed to split the sky. The emergency lights flickered and died. Someone screamed. And then, in the renewed darkness, Caleb heard it. The sound of glass breaking. "Move!" Victoria's hand grabbed his arm and yanked him sideways just as something heavy crashed through the windows near their table. Wind howled into the restaurant. Rain sprayed across the floor. People were shouting, scrambling away from the windows. "Stairs!" Victoria snapped. "Now!" They ran. The emergency exit sign glowed faintly at the far end of the restaurant. Caleb could barely see 3 feet in front of him. His shoulder clipped a chair. Victoria kept her hand locked around his wrist, pulling him forward with surprising strength. They burst through the exit door into the stairwell just as another window exploded somewhere behind them. The stairwell was pitch black except for a single backup light 2 flights down. Caleb caught his breath and tried to slow his racing heart. Next to him, Victoria was breathing hard but controlled. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine. You?" "Yeah." They stood there for a moment, listening to the chaos in the restaurant behind them. The door was heavy enough that it muffled most of the noise, but Caleb could still hear shouts and the sound of more breaking glass. "We can't stay here," Victoria said. "If the windows are compromising structural integrity, we need to get to ground level." "Agreed." They started down the stairs. 30 floors in darkness with only occasional emergency lights was going to take a while, but it beat staying in a restaurant that was actively falling apart. They made it down 2 flights before Victoria stopped abruptly. "What?" Caleb asked. "Listen, Walshi." He went quiet. At first, he didn't hear anything except his own breathing and the distant rumble of thunder. Then he caught it, a low, ominous groaning sound coming from somewhere below them. "That doesn't sound good," Caleb said. "That sounds like structural stress." Victoria pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating concrete stairs that looked suddenly less stable than they had a minute ago. The groaning sound got louder. "We need to move," Victoria said. "Fast." They took the stairs 2 at a time, Victoria's heels clicking against concrete despite the speed. The groaning sound followed them down, getting closer. Caleb's mind was racing through worst-case scenarios, none of which ended well. They hit the 27th floor landing just as something above them gave way with a sound like thunder. "Down!" Caleb grabbed Victoria and pulled her against the wall as debris rained through the stairwell. Dust choked the air. The entire building seemed to shudder. When the noise stopped, Caleb realized he was pressed against Victoria in the darkness, his arm over her head, her hands gripping his shirt. They were both breathing hard. "We need another route," Victoria said quietly. "The elevators are offline." "Then we're stuck." Victoria pulled away and aimed her phone light back up the stairs. The beam showed a section of ceiling that had partially collapsed, blocking the path they'd just taken. Then she turned and shone the light down. The stairs below looked intact but ended at a door marked 27. "We go through the floor," she said. "Find another stairwell." It wasn't a great plan, but it was the only one they had. The door to the 27th floor was locked. Caleb threw his shoulder against it twice before Victoria pushed him aside and swiped a keycard he hadn't realized she was carrying. The lock clicked open. "Executive access," she said by way of explanation. The 27th floor was corporate offices, completely dark except for Victoria's phone light. They moved quickly through a maze of cubicles and conference rooms looking for another exit. Thunder boomed outside, close enough that Caleb felt it in his chest. "There," Victoria said, pointing toward a glass door at the far end of the floor. They were halfway across the office when the lights flickered and came back on. Caleb stopped. "Power's back." "Go, bullshit. "Generators?" Victoria corrected. She was already moving again. "Which means the elevators should be operational." They found the elevator bank near the glass door. 3 cars, all showing lit buttons. Victoria jabbed the down button and they waited. 30 seconds. 45. The numbers above the middle elevator started descending. 23, 22, 21. The doors opened. They stepped inside just as thunder cracked loud enough to rattle the building. Victoria hit the button for the ground floor. The doors slid shut, and then, with a sound like a dying animal, the elevator jerked to a stop. The lights inside flickered once and died. Caleb felt his stomach drop as the emergency lighting kicked in, a single dim panel that barely illuminated Victoria's face. She was staring at the control panel like she could intimidate it into working. "No," she said quietly. Caleb hit the emergency call button. Nothing happened. He hit it again. Still nothing. "Generators must have failed again," he said. Victoria pulled out her phone. No signal. She tried anyway, dialing what Caleb assumed was 911. The call didn't connect. They were trapped. 30 floors above ground, in a metal box with no power and no way to call for help, while a storm destroyed the city outside. Caleb slid down the fall until he was sitting on the floor. This was officially the worst date in human history. "Well," he said into the silence, "at least it can't get worse." Victoria looked down at him with an expression that suggested she was reconsidering every life choice that had led to this moment. Then she sat down on the opposite wall, crossed her legs with impossible grace given the circumstances, and said, "Mr. Mercer, we need to establish some ground rules." End of part 1. Ground rules? Caleb stared at her across the dim elevator. "We're stuck in a metal box during a thunderstorm, and you want to establish ground rules?" Victoria's face was half shadow in the emergency light, but her voice was steady. "We could be here for hours. Structure prevents panic." "I'm not panicking. Not yet." She adjusted her position slightly, and Caleb heard the quiet scrape of her heels against the floor. "But statistically, confined spaces during crisis situations lead to irrational behavior. Clear expectations minimize that risk." "You're actually serious right now." "I'm always serious, Mr. Mercer." Yeah, I've noticed." Caleb leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. His shirt was still damp from the rain that had blown into the restaurant. Water had soaked through to his skin, and now the air conditioning, still running on whatever backup power was keeping the emergency light alive, was making him cold. "Fine. What are your ground rules?" "First, we conserve phone batteries. No unnecessary usage." "Agreed." "Dre, Bob, E.T. and Tim." "Second, we stay calm. No catastrophizing or worst-case scenario discussions." Caleb opened one eye. "We're trapped in an elevator during what sounds like the apocalypse outside. Worst-case scenarios seem pretty relevant. They're also unproductive." Victoria's tone didn't invite argument. "Third, we maintain professional boundaries." "As opposed to what? You think I'm going to try something?" "I think we're both under stress, and people do strange things under stress." She met his gaze directly. "I'm establishing expectations to avoid uncomfortable situations." Caleb laughed. A short, sharp sound that bounced off the metal walls. "You're unbelievable. I'm practical. You're terrified of losing control for 5 seconds." Something flickered across Victoria's face, too quick to identify. "I'm not terrified of anything, Mr. Mercer. I'm simply preventing problems before they occur. It's called leadership. It's called being impossible to be around." The words came out harsher than Caleb intended, but he was tired and cold and stuck in an elevator with someone who apparently thought you could manage a natural disaster with corporate policies. Victoria's expression went completely blank, the same mask she'd worn during that disciplinary meeting, when she'd listened to Caleb defend his actions without showing a flicker of emotion. "I see," she said quietly. "Then I'll make this simple. We don't talk unless necessary. You stay on your side of the elevator. I'll stay on mine. When rescue arrives, we leave and never mention this again." "Fine by me." "Excellent." Silence dropped between them like a wall. Victoria pulled out her phone, checked it one more time even though Caleb could see there was still no signal, then powered it down completely to save battery. She set it on the floor beside her with careful precision and folded her hands in her lap. Caleb watched her for a minute, looking for cracks in the armor. There weren't any. Victoria Sinclair sat perfectly still, perfectly composed, like she was waiting for a meeting to start rather than trapped 30 floors above ground in a powerless building during a violent storm. It was impressive, in a deeply irritating way. Thunder boomed outside, close enough that Caleb felt the vibration through the elevator walls. The emergency light flickered but held. Victoria didn't even flinch. Victoria, doesn't that bother you? Caleb asked before he could stop himself. Victoria's eyes flicked toward him. I thought we weren't talking. I'm curious. About what? How you just sit there like none of this matters. It matters, Victoria said. Reacting emotionally won't change our circumstances. So you just turn it off? The fear? I don't turn off anything. I simply don't indulge unproductive emotions. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. You're the opposite. You feel everything and let it drive your decisions. That's not true, isn't it? Victoria's voice was cool, analytical. 8 months ago, you challenged a company-wide policy decision in front of 200 employees because you were angry about working conditions. You didn't schedule a meeting, didn't gather data to support your position, didn't follow proper channels. You just stood up during a Q&A session and started making demands. Caleb's jaw tightened. People were getting hurt. Someone needed to say something. Someone needed to say something strategically, Victoria corrected. Instead, you created a spectacle that undermined your own credibility and made it politically impossible for me to address your concerns without looking like I'd caved to pressure. So you ignored them entirely? Well, I'll say, I addressed them through the proper channels over the following 6 months. Every safety issue you raised has either been resolved or is currently scheduled for implementation. Victoria's eyes were sharp in the dim light. But you didn't know that because you never followed up. You made your dramatic statement, got your written warning, and went back to assuming I didn't care. The accusation hit harder than Caleb expected, mostly because she was right. He'd been so angry after that meeting, so convinced Victoria was another corporate executive who saw workers as numbers on a spreadsheet that he'd never actually checked whether anything had changed. You could have told me, he said. Why? You'd already decided what kind of person I was. You didn't exactly make it easy to think otherwise. I wasn't trying to make anything easy, Mr. Mercer. I was trying to run a company. Victoria shifted slightly, and Caleb caught a glimpse of something that might have been frustration beneath the ice. You think I don't know what people say about me? That I'm cold, ruthless, impossible to work with? I know exactly what my reputation is. I built it deliberately. Why? Because being feared is more efficient than being liked. She said it like it was obvious. People who like you expect friendship, patience, second chances. People who fear you expect competence and they stay out of your way while you deliver it. Caleb stared at her. That's the most depressing thing I've ever heard. It's reality. It's lonely. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something in her posture went rigid. I didn't ask for your psychological assessment, but, so I'm not assessing. I'm observing. Then observe silently. Can't do that. We're stuck here, and I'm curious now. Caleb leaned forward slightly. What happened to you that made you think being feared was better than being human? Nothing happened to me, Victoria said sharply. I simply learned how the world works faster than most people. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting. Thunder crashed again, and this time the emergency light died completely. Darkness swallowed the elevator so absolute that Caleb couldn't see his own hand in front of his face. He heard Victoria's sharp intake of breath, the first genuinely uncontrolled sound she'd made all night. Power surge, she said after a moment, and her voice was almost steady. The emergency systems must be cycling. Or failing. That's not helpful, Mr. Mercer. I thought we were being realistic. The light flickered back on, dimmer than before. In the reduced glow, Victoria looked pale. Her hands were gripped together in her lap, tight enough that Caleb could see the tension in her knuckles. You're scared, he said quietly. I'm not. You are. It's okay. I'm scared too. Victoria's jaw worked for a second before she spoke. I don't like enclosed spaces. Claustrophobic? No. I just... She stopped, seemed to reconsider whatever she'd been about to say, then continued in a different direction. When I was younger, I spent time in places where locked doors meant bad things were about to happen. I've learned to manage it, but the instinct remains. Caleb felt something shift in his chest. That was the most personal thing Victoria had said all night, and she delivered it like a clinical observation, stripped of emotion, reduced to facts. But underneath the careful control, Caleb heard something that sounded like real fear. "Hey," he said, "we're going to be fine. The power will come back, or someone will get the backup generators running, or rescue crews will start checking buildings. This isn't permanent. You don't know that." "No," Caleb admitted. "But I've got a kid who needs me to pick her up from a sleepover tomorrow morning. So I'm going to operate on the assumption that I'm getting out of here because the alternative isn't acceptable." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. "That's not logic, that's denial. Call it whatever you want, it works for me." "Does it? Pretending bad things won't happen?" "I don't pretend bad things won't happen," Caleb said quietly. "I know they will. Bad things happen all the time. My wife died 3 years ago and left me with a daughter I'm barely managing to raise by myself. I work 60-hour weeks at a job that doesn't pay enough, in a warehouse where the air conditioning doesn't work, for a company run by someone who thinks fear is more valuable than compassion. I know exactly how bad things can get." The words came out harder than he intended. Victoria's expression shifted into something Caleb couldn't read. "I'm sorry," she said. "About your wife." "Yeah, me too." "How did she die?" Caleb almost told her it was none of her business. But something about the darkness and the isolation and the strange honesty of the moment made him answer instead. "Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light." He picked at a loose thread on his shirt cuff. "Sophie was 4. She doesn't really remember her mom, which somehow makes it worse. I've got pictures and videos and I tell her stories, but it's not the same as having a mother, and I know I'm not enough. I'm just one person trying to do the job of 2, and I screw it up constantly." "I'm sure that's not true." "It is true. Last week I forgot it was pajama day at school, and Sophie was the only kid in regular clothes. The week before that I sent her to a birthday party without a present because I forgot to check the calendar. She never complains, which kills me, because she should. She should be angry that she got stuck with a dad who can barely remember to buy groceries." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She's lucky to have you." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Victoria's voice had lost some of its sharp edges. "You're here, aren't you? Working impossible hours, showing up even when you're exhausted, fighting for better conditions even when it costs you professionally. You're trying. That matters more than pajama days and birthday presents." Caleb looked at her. In the dim emergency light, Victoria's face had softened into something that almost looked like empathy. It was startling, like watching ice crack. "Did you grow up with parents who tried?" he asked. Victoria's expression shuddered immediately. "We're not discussing my childhood." "Why not? I just told you about my wife." "That was your choice. And this is mine. Come on, Victoria. We're stuck in an elevator. What else are we going to do?" "Not talk about my personal history." "Fine." Caleb leaned back against the wall. "Then tell me why you really cut warehouse benefits." "I already explained that. You gave me the corporate answer. I want the real one." Victoria sighed, a small, frustrated sound. "There is no real answer separate from the corporate one, Mr. Mercer. I made a decision based on available data and competing priorities. The warehouse wasn't being singled out. Every department faced cuts. But the warehouse felt it more because we were already operating on the thinnest margins." "Yes. So you knew it would hurt us." "I knew it would create difficulties," Victoria corrected. "I also knew that if I didn't reduce operational costs by 18% across the board, the company would fail and everyone would lose their jobs, including you." Caleb absorbed that. "You were trying to save the company. I was trying to keep 12,000 people employed through a recession that destroyed 3 of our competitors." Victoria's voice had gone hard again. "So yes, I cut benefits. I reduced overtime budgets. I delayed infrastructure improvements. And I made those decisions knowing people like you would hate me for it, because that was preferable to bankruptcy." "You could have explained that." "To whom? Every employee individually? The media who wanted a villain? The board members who were already questioning whether a 30-year-old woman could handle a CEO position. Victoria shook her head. There was no explanation that would have satisfied anyone, so I stopped trying to be understood and focused on keeping the company alive. Thunder rumbled, quieter now. The storm was moving away. Caleb processed what Victoria had just told him, rearranging his understanding of the past 8 months around this new information. I was wrong about you, he said finally. Yes, you were. You're still impossible to be around, and you're still reckless and emotionally driven. But you were trying to help, in your own terrible way. Victoria almost smiled. And you were trying to protect people, in your own destructive way. What? We're a disaster. Individually or together? Both. This time Victoria did smile, small and fleeting, but real. It transformed her face completely, softening the severe lines into something that looked almost approachable. Caleb found himself staring before he caught himself and looked away. The elevator groaned slightly, and they both froze. Metal settling, probably. Or the building shifting. Nothing immediately catastrophic. How long do you think we've been in here? Caleb asked. Victoria checked her watch, an elegant thing that probably cost more than Caleb's monthly rent. 47 minutes. Feels longer. Time distorts in stressful situations. Is that another one of your leadership facts? It's neuroscience. Of course it is. Caleb stretched his legs out in front of him. His back was starting to hurt from sitting on the floor. Can I ask you something? That depends on the question. Why did you actually show up tonight? To the date, I mean. You could have just told your assistant no. Victoria considered this. Diane is persistent. If I'd refused outright, she would have found another way to interfere. I thought showing up and proving it was a bad idea would be more efficient than arguing. So you plan to have a terrible time on purpose? I plan to establish clear boundaries through demonstration, yes. How's that working out for you? Well, we're trapped in an elevator, so I'd say the universe decided to establish boundaries of its own. Caleb laughed. He couldn't help it. The absurdity was too much. Victoria looked at him like he'd lost his mind, which made him laugh harder. What's funny? She asked. All of it. This entire night. Your assistant and my sister setting us up. You planning to have a bad date like it's a business strategy. The storm, the elevator. The fact that we've spent 47 minutes arguing about corporate policy while trapped 30 floors above ground. He wiped his eyes. It's the worst first date in human history. It's definitely in the top percentile. Top percentile. Listen to you. How else should I phrase it? Most people would just say, yeah, it's pretty bad. I'm not most people, Mr. Mercer. No, Caleb agreed. You're really not. They fell into silence again, but it felt different this time, less hostile. The elevator creaked and settled. Outside, the thunder had faded to distant rumbles. The worst of the storm was passing. Tell me about Sophie, Victoria said suddenly. Caleb looked up in surprise. What do you want to know? Anything. You said she's 8? Yeah, 3rd grade. Caleb searched for the right words. She's the best thing I've ever done. Smart, funny, ridiculously optimistic about everything. She makes friends everywhere she goes. Last month, she befriended the grumpy cashier at our grocery store, and now the woman saves coupons for us. She sounds remarkable. She is. I have no idea how. She doesn't get it from me. Her mom was like that, made everyone feel like they mattered. Caleb pulled out his phone, reconsidered. Caleb pulled out his, then figured they might as well use the battery for something worthwhile. He pulled up a photo and turned the screen toward Victoria. That's her. Halloween last year. Victoria leaned forward to look. In the photo, Sophie was dressed as an astronaut, a homemade costume that was mostly cardboard and aluminum foil, but that Sophie had insisted was perfect. She wanted to be Sally Ride, Caleb explained. Spent weeks researching the actual spacesuit design. I tried to convince her to just buy something, but she wanted it to be accurate. She built this herself? With some help. Okay, a lot of help, but she directed the entire operation like a tiny engineer. Victoria studied the photo. She has your eyes. Yeah, and her mom's smile, thank God. You must be terrified of failing her. The observation was so direct, so accurate. that Caleb felt something catch in his chest. Every single day. But you keep trying anyway. What else am I going to do? Give up? Caleb shook his head. She deserves better than that. She deserves better than me, honestly, but I'm what she's got. So I work the extra shifts and I forget about pajama day and I feed her cereal for dinner sometimes. And I hope that somehow it's enough. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than Caleb had ever heard it. My parents abandoned me when I was 7, she said, left me at a fire station in Chicago with a note that said they couldn't afford to keep me anymore. I spent the next 11 years in foster care, 6 different homes, 4 different schools. Most of the families were fine, a few weren't, but none of them were mine, you know? None of them were people who'd chosen me, who wanted me. I was just there, a temporary obligation. Caleb didn't know what to say. The image of 7-year-old Victoria being left behind by her parents was so at odds with the controlled, powerful woman sitting across from him that his brain couldn't quite reconcile the two. That's why you don't like locked doors, he said quietly. Victoria nodded once. One of the foster homes had a father who thought discipline meant locking kids in closets when they misbehaved. I learned very quickly to be perfect, to never give anyone a reason to be disappointed. Is that why you're so impossible to be around? Victoria's smile was bitter. Probably. I spent my teenage years learning that control was the only thing that kept me safe. If I was smart enough, composed enough, untouchable enough, nobody could hurt me. Did it work? Mostly. I got a scholarship to Northwestern, worked 3 jobs to cover expenses, graduated top of my class. Built a career, built a reputation, built walls so high nobody could see over them. She looked at Caleb directly. And then tonight I ended up trapped in an elevator with someone who seems determined to see over them anyway. I'm not trying to... Yes, you are. You've been digging since the moment the power went out. Victoria's voice wasn't accusatory, just factual. It's exhausting and uncomfortable, and I don't know how to make you stop. Do you want me to stop? Victoria considered this. I don't know. Part of me does. The part that's kept me functional for 23 years says this is dangerous and I should shut it down immediately. And the other part? The other part is tired, Victoria admitted. Tired of being alone, tired of being feared, tired of sitting in an elevator pretending I'm not scared when I'm absolutely terrified. The confession hung in the air between them. Caleb saw the exact moment Victoria realized what she'd just said, saw her try to pull the mask back into place and fail. She looked young suddenly. Not like a CEO, but like someone who'd been fighting for so long she'd forgotten what peace felt like. You don't have to be perfect right now, Caleb said. We're stuck in a metal box. Nobody's watching. You're allowed to just be. I don't know how to do that. Sure you do. You're doing it right now. Victoria looked down at her hands. Her perfectly manicured fingers were still gripped together, knuckles white. Slowly, deliberately, she loosened her grip and let her hands rest naturally in her lap. This is terrifying, she said. What is? Letting you see me like this. Like what? Human? Weak. You're not weak, Victoria. You're just scared. There's a difference. Not in my experience. Then your experience is wrong. Caleb shifted forward slightly. Strength isn't pretending you don't feel things. It's feeling them and doing what needs to be done anyway. You're scared of enclosed spaces because someone locked you in closets when you were a kid, but you still got in this elevator. That's not weakness. That's courage. Victoria looked at him with an expression Caleb couldn't quite identify. Surprise, maybe. Or disbelief. Like she'd never considered that interpretation before. You're very strange, Mr. Mercer. Caleb. And yeah, I get that a lot. From whom? Mostly from my sister. She thinks I'm too honest. Is there such a thing? Apparently. Emma says I tell people things they don't want to hear just because they're true. That sounds accurate, Victoria said. You've certainly done that with me. Sorry. Don't be. It's refreshing, actually. Most people are too intimidated to tell me when I'm wrong. I'm too tired to be intimidated. Victoria almost smiled again. How do you do that? Do what? Make everything seem manageable. We're trapped in an elevator during a power outage, and you're sitting there like it's just another Tuesday. It's not manageable, Caleb said. I'm just good at pretending it is. I've had practice. Single parenthood is basically advanced level pretending everything's fine. Sophie asks if we have enough money, and I say yes, even when we don't. She asks if I'm tired, and I say no, even when I'm exhausted. Because that's what you do. You pretend until it becomes true, or at least true enough to get through another day. That sounds exhausting. It is. But what's the alternative? Fall apart. Sophie doesn't need that. She needs me to be okay, so I'm okay. Even when you're not. Especially when I'm not. Victoria studied him in the dim light. We're more similar than I thought. How do you figure? We both learn to survive by controlling our reactions. You pretend everything's manageable. I eliminate anything that isn't. Victoria tilted her head slightly. Different methods, same goal. Oko machine. And look where it got us, trapped in an elevator. Together. Yeah, Caleb said, together. The words settled between them with unexpected weight. Victoria looked away first, and Caleb saw something that might have been vulnerability flash across her face before she locked it down again. The elevator shuddered suddenly, a deep, grinding movement that made Caleb's stomach drop. Victoria grabbed the handrail, her face going pale. That was what? Building settling, Caleb said quickly. Just the storm stress. We're fine. You don't know that. No, but I'm choosing to believe it anyway. Remember? Denial works for me. Victoria let out a shaky breath that might have been a laugh. You're insane. Probably. They waited, listening for more sounds of structural failure. None came. The elevator hung suspended in its shaft, dark and quiet and stubbornly intact. Caleb? Victoria's voice was small. Yeah? Thank you. For what? For not being who I thought you were. Caleb looked at her across the small space. Same to you. They sat in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. The emergency light flickered occasionally, threatening to die but never quite managing it. Thunder rumbled in the distance, getting farther away with each passing minute. The storm was leaving them behind. Caleb checked his phone. 9:43. They'd been trapped for almost 2 hours. How much longer do you think? He asked. Until rescue? Hard to say. If the generators are still down, building maintenance will need to manually reset systems. That could take hours. Victoria paused. Or the power company could restore main power and we'll be moving in minutes. So, somewhere between 5 minutes and 5 hours. That's my estimate, yes. Great. Super helpful. I don't deal in false certainty, Caleb. It was the first time she'd used his first name. The sound of it, casual, almost intimate, did something strange to Caleb's chest. Well, Victoria, he said, testing the sound of her name in return, what do you want to talk about while we wait? I thought we'd covered everything. Corporate policy, dead spouses, traumatic childhoods. What's left? I don't know. Normal stuff? Such as? Movies, books, favorite foods, the things people usually talk about on first dates. Victoria raised an eyebrow. You think this qualifies as a first date? Doesn't it? We met for dinner at a restaurant. Sure, we got trapped in an elevator and spent 2 hours arguing, but that's just details. Most first dates don't involve structural failure and potential death. Most first dates are boring. Victoria shook her head, but she was smiling. Fine. Favorite movie? The Shawshank Redemption. Of course it is. What's that mean? It means you strike me as someone who likes stories about hope and perseverance. And you don't? I prefer The Godfather. Clear power structures, strategic thinking, consequences for betrayal. Caleb laughed. That's the most CEO answer possible. What can I say? I'm consistent. Victoria shifted slightly, getting more comfortable. Favorite food? Pizza. Specifically the terrible frozen kind that Sophie and I make on Friday nights when we're too tired to cook. That sounds nice. It's chaos. We usually burn it and eat it anyway while watching whatever cartoon she's currently obsessed with. Still nice, Victoria said quietly. I eat most meals alone in my office. By choice? By necessity. If I leave early, people think I'm not committed. If I eat in the company cafeteria, employees spend the entire meal too nervous to actually eat. So you isolate yourself to make everyone else comfortable. I isolate myself to maintain authority? Same thing. Oz.
No, it's not. Yeah, Caleb said gently. It is. Victoria opened her mouth to argue, then stopped. Something shifted in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or resignation. I suppose you're right. I usually am. Just ask my sister. She'll tell you I'm insufferably right about everything. I believe that.
They fell quiet again. Caleb could hear his own breathing, steady and even. Victoria's matched it, slower now than it had been at the start. She was relaxing, letting the fear drain out of her posture. It made her look different, softer, human. Can I ask you something personal? Caleb said. Haven't you been doing that for the past hour? More personal. How is that possible? Trust me. Caleb hesitated, then committed. When was the last time you were actually happy? Victoria went very still. What kind of question is that? An honest one. When was the last time you felt genuinely happy? Not satisfied with a business outcome or pleased about efficiency gains. Actually happy. I don't... Victoria stopped, started again. I don't think about happiness. It's not a useful metric. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. It's realistic. It's giving up. No, it's prioritizing things I can control. Victoria's voice had gone defensive again. Happiness is subjective and temporary. Success is measurable and lasting. And lonely. So you've said. Because it's true, Victoria. Look at where you are right now, trapped in an elevator with someone you barely know, because your only social relationship is with an assistant who had to trick you into having dinner with another human being. Caleb kept his voice gentle despite the harsh words. That's not success. That's survival. There's nothing wrong with survival. There is when you're not actually living. Victoria's jaw tightened. For a moment, Caleb thought she was going to shut down completely, pull the Ice Queen routine and spend the rest of their trapped time in hostile silence. But instead, she said, very quietly, I don't know how to do anything else. Sure you do. You did it tonight. I argued with you about corporate policy. You laughed. You told me about your childhood. You used my first name. Caleb leaned forward slightly. You were human for a couple hours. That counts. That was necessity. We were stuck. So we're still stuck. Keep going. Keep going where? Being human. Talking like a person instead of a CEO. Letting yourself feel things instead of managing them. Victoria looked at him like he'd suggested she jump out the elevator. That's terrifying. I know. What if I can't? Then you can't. But at least you tried. She absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. Caleb could almost see the gears turning, analyzing risk, calculating outcomes, looking for the strategic advantage. Old habits running deep. Then Victoria did something that shocked him completely. She moved. Not far, just shifted from her wall to sit next to him on his wall, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The movement was awkward, uncertain, like she was doing something she'd never practiced before. This okay? She asked. Caleb's heart was doing something complicated in his chest. Yeah, this is okay. They sat there in the dim emergency light, not quite touching, not quite separate. The elevator hummed quietly around them. Thunder muttered in the distance, barely audible now. I was happy once, Victoria said suddenly, when I was 6, before my parents left. I remember my dad teaching me to ride a bike in the park. He ran behind me holding the seat, and I was laughing, and for maybe 10 minutes everything felt perfect. She paused. I think that might be the last time. Everything after that was just surviving. Caleb felt something break open in his chest. That's 24 years of just surviving. Yes, that's too long. I know. Well, you deserve more than that. Victoria turned to look at him, and in the dim light her eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. Do I? Yeah, Caleb said. You do. They stared at each other for a long moment. Caleb was suddenly aware of how close they were sitting, how easy it would be to close the distance between them, how much he unexpectedly wanted to. This was a terrible idea. They barely knew each other. They'd spent most of the night arguing. She was his CEO. He was broke and exhausted and had a daughter waiting for him. This was complicated and messy and would probably explode in both their faces. But Caleb was tired of doing the smart thing, tired of always being careful, tired of pretending he didn't feel things. So he did something completely reckless. He reached over and took Victoria's hand. She froze, didn't pull away, but went completely still, like any movement might shatter whatever was happening between them. "This okay?" Caleb asked, echoing her words from earlier. Victoria looked down at their joined hands. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. Slowly, carefully, she laced her fingers through his and held on. "Yes," she whispered. "This is okay." They sat like that in the darkness, holding hands like teenagers, while the storm died outside and the elevator hung suspended between floors. And for the first time in years, Caleb felt something that wasn't exhaustion or fear or desperate hope. He felt like maybe things were going to be okay. The elevator jolted suddenly, a sharp, upward movement that made them both grab the handrail. Lights flickered overhead. The normal panel lights came back on, washing out the dim emergency glow. Victoria's phone buzzed. Then Caleb's. Power was back. They looked at each other, still holding hands, as the elevator began its descent toward the ground floor. Neither of them let go. The elevator doors opened onto a lobby that looked like a disaster zone. Emergency crews were everywhere. Firefighters in yellow gear, building maintenance staff shouting into radios, a few stranded restaurant patrons wrapped in blankets near the entrance. Glass crunched under boots. Water pooled near the elevators where rain had blown in through broken windows somewhere above. Caleb and Victoria stepped out together, still holding hands. Nobody noticed at first, everyone too busy managing the chaos to pay attention to two more people emerging from an elevator. Then a woman in a hard hat spotted them and hurried over. "You folks okay? We've been trying to get power back to the elevator systems for the past hour." "How long were you trapped?" "Watts." "About 2 hours," Victoria said. Her CEO voice was back, calm, authoritative, completely controlled, but her hand was still gripped tight around Caleb's. The woman made notes on a clipboard. "Any injuries, difficulty breathing, panic attacks?" "We're fine," Caleb said. "All right. We need contact information in case building management needs to follow up about the incident. There'll be an investigation into the power failure and structural damage." Victoria rattled off her information with mechanical efficiency. Caleb did the same. The woman thanked them and moved on to coordinate with a crew near the stairwell. Around them, people rushed and shouted and tried to restore order to controlled chaos. They stood there in the middle of it all, hands still clasped, neither quite ready to acknowledge that they'd have to let go eventually. "I should call my driver," Victoria said quietly. "Yeah, I should get to my truck." But neither of them moved. A paramedic approached, insisting on checking them over despite their protests. They were separated for the first time since the elevator. Caleb guided to one side of the lobby, Victoria to the other. The paramedic shone a light in Caleb's eyes, checked his pulse, asked questions about chest pain and dizziness that Caleb answered on autopilot. Across the lobby, he could see Victoria submitting to the same examination with visible impatience. Their eyes met across the distance. Victoria's expression was carefully neutral, but something in her gaze made Caleb's chest tighten. The paramedic declared him fine and moved on. Caleb pulled out his phone and saw 17 missed calls from Emma and a text message that simply read, "Call me right now." He called. Emma answered before the first ring finished. "Oh my God, are you alive? I've been freaking out. The news is showing buildings all over downtown with damage, and you weren't answering, and I thought, I'm fine, Em. The power went out and I got stuck in an elevator for a while, but I'm okay." You got stuck in an elevator during the storm?" "Yeah." "With Victoria Sinclair?" "Yeah." There was a pause. Then Emma said very carefully, "And how did that go?" "Complicated." "Complicated good or complicated bad?" Caleb watched Victoria across the lobby. She was on her own phone now, speaking to someone with clipped efficiency. Her posture was perfect, her expression unreadable. Every inch the CEO again. "I don't know yet," Caleb said honestly. "But something happened. Maybe." "Caleb, I have to go, Em. I'll call you tomorrow." He hung up before she could interrogate him further. Victoria was walking toward him, phone still pressed to her ear. "Don't care what time it is, David. I need a full structural assessment of the building by tomorrow afternoon, and I want a report on why the backup generators failed. She paused, listening. That's not acceptable. Figure it out. She ended the call and looked at Caleb. My driver's outside. Okay. You need a ride? Your truck is still in the parking garage, right? Yeah, but I can walk. It's only a few floors down. In a building that just sustained storm damage with potentially compromised structural integrity. Victoria's expression didn't change, but her tone carried the slightest edge of concern. Don't be stupid, Caleb. I'm not being... My driver will take you to the garage entrance. It's not negotiable. Caleb almost argued. Then he saw the look in Victoria's eyes, the same fear that had crept in during the elevator, now carefully locked down but still visible if you knew where to look. She was worried about him walking through the damaged building alone. All right, he said. Thanks. They walked toward the exit together, navigating around emergency crews and debris. Outside, the air was cold and wet. Rain had stopped, but water still dripped from buildings and pooled in streets. A black sedan waited at the curb, engine running. The driver opened the back door. Victoria slid in smoothly. Caleb followed, suddenly hyper-aware of how out of place he was in the leather interior of what was probably a $70,000 vehicle. Parking garage entrance, Victoria told the driver. Loading zone level. The car pulled away from the curb. Inside, silence pressed down like a weight. Everything that had felt natural and honest in the darkness of the elevator now seemed impossible in the real world. Caleb didn't know what to say. Apparently neither did Victoria. They drove for maybe 90 seconds before Victoria spoke. So, she said, that happened. Caleb almost laughed. Of all the ways she could have started this conversation, that was the most awkward. Yeah, it did. I'm not sure what the appropriate protocol is here. Protocol? For when you spend 2 hours trapped with someone and share significant personal information and then... She gestured vaguely between them. Whatever that was. You mean when we held hands? Victoria's jaw tightened slightly. Yes, that. I don't think there is a protocol for it. We just figure it out as we go. I don't like not having a plan. I know, but some things you can't plan, Victoria. You just have to let them happen. She looked at him directly for the first time since they'd left the building. And if I don't know how to do that, then I guess we're both learning something new. The car pulled up to the parking garage entrance. Through the window, Caleb could see his truck sitting in the same spot he'd left it 3 hours ago. It felt like a different lifetime. The driver put the car in park but didn't get out. This was Caleb's exit. He should thank Victoria for the ride, get out, drive home, and pretend tonight was just a weird story to tell someday. Instead, he said, "Can I see you again?" Victoria went very still. In what context? Patsy. I don't know. Dinner? Coffee? Another elevator during a natural disaster? That's not funny. It's a little funny. Caleb? She stopped, started over. This isn't a good idea. You work for my company. There are policies about fraternization, power dynamics, professional boundaries. So we break the policies. I don't break policies. You literally just admitted to planning to expense a personal dinner as a business meeting. That's different. How? That's creative accounting. This is... Victoria trailed off, searching for words. This is complicated. Yeah, it is. Caleb shifted to face her fully. But complicated doesn't mean impossible. And I don't know about you, but I haven't felt this awake in years. So yeah, it's complicated and potentially stupid and probably going to cause problems. But I still want to see you again. Yeah, Victoria stared at him. In the dim light from the parking garage entrance, her face was half shadow, expression unreadable. Caleb could see her running calculations, weighing risks, looking for the safe play. I have a daughter, Caleb said quietly. Which means I don't have time for games or casual whatever this is. If you're not interested, tell me now, and we both walk away. But if there's even a chance you felt what I felt in that elevator, then I need to know. What did you feel? Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. Like maybe I wasn't alone anymore. Like someone actually saw me instead of just seeing a single dad who's barely holding it together. Okay. Caleb paused. Like I could tell you true things and you wouldn't run away.
Victoria's breath caught slightly. I felt that too. Then let's see where it goes. It could end badly. It could end amazingly. You don't know that.
No, Caleb admitted.
But I'm choosing to believe it anyway, remember? Denial works for me. Victoria almost smiled. Then she pulled out her phone and handed it to him. Put your number in.
Caleb took the phone, fingers brushing against hers. He added his contact information and handed it back. Victoria looked at the screen for a moment, then back at him. I'm not good at this,
she said. Relationships, letting people in, being vulnerable. I noticed.
And I have no idea how to balance personal involvement with professional authority. We'll figure it out. You're very confident for someone who's about to date his boss.
I'm very tired of being careful, Caleb corrected. There's a difference. Victoria studied him in the dim light. Then, moving carefully like she was approaching something dangerous,
she leaned forward and pressed her lips against his. The kiss was brief, uncertain. Nothing like the polished confidence Victoria projected in every other aspect of her life. It was awkward and real and over in maybe 3 seconds. When she pulled back, her cheeks were flushed. I don't do that, ever, on first dates. Good thing this wasn't a first date. This was a natural disaster. Same thing, apparently. Caleb grinned and opened the car door. I'll wait for your call. What if I don't call? Then I'll show up at your office and make a scene. I've got a track record for that, remember? Victoria shook her head, but she was smiling. Go home, Caleb. Going. He climbed out of the car and watched it pull away, taillights disappearing into the wet streets. Then he walked to his truck, got in, and sat there for a full minute just processing what had happened. He'd gone to dinner expecting disaster. He'd gotten trapped in an elevator, argued about corporate policy, shared his worst fears, and somehow ended the night with Victoria Sinclair's phone number and the memory of her kissing him in the back of a town car. Emma was never going to let him hear the end of this. Caleb started the truck and headed home through empty streets still littered with storm debris. His phone buzzed twice, Emma demanding details, but he ignored it. He needed time to think before he tried to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. The house was dark when he pulled into the driveway. Sophie was at her friend's place until tomorrow morning, which meant Caleb had the rare luxury of an empty house and time to process. He unlocked the front door and stepped into the familiar chaos of their living room. Sophie's backpack in the middle of the floor, her shoes kicked off near the couch, the solar system poster still spread across the kitchen table. Home. Messy and imperfect and his. He made coffee even though it was almost 11 at night, because sleep wasn't happening anytime soon. Then he sat at the kitchen table and stared at his phone, debating whether texting Victoria would seem desperate or just interested. Before he could decide, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number that could only be one person. I made it home, in case you were wondering. Caleb smiled and typed back, I was wondering. Glad you're safe. This is strange. What is? Texting. I don't usually do this. What do you usually do? There was a long pause, then, nothing. I usually do nothing. Work, sleep, repeat. Sounds lonely. It was, past tense. Caleb stared at those 2 words, was, past tense, and felt something shift in his chest. Victoria was trying. In her careful, controlled way, she was actually trying. Tell me something true, he texted. Another pause. Like what? Anything. Something you don't usually tell people. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared 3 times. Caleb waited, giving her space to decide how honest she wanted to be. Finally, I'm scared this is going to fall apart. That you'll realize I'm not worth the complication and walk away. And I'm scared of how much that possibility already bothers me after one night. Caleb's throat tightened. He could picture Victoria sitting in whatever immaculate apartment she probably owned, alone in the dark, forcing herself to type words that went against every instinct she'd spent 24 years building. I'm scared too, he typed back. Scared I'm going to screw this up like I screw up everything else. Scared Sophie will get attached and then you'll leave and I'll have to watch her heart break. Scared I'm being selfish wanting this when I barely have time to breathe. So we're both terrified. Yeah, seems like it. And we're doing this anyway? Looks that way. That's objectively insane. Probably, but I stopped trusting objective a while ago. The typing indicator appeared again. This time it stayed for almost a minute before the message came through. I have a board meeting tomorrow at 9 and conference calls until 6. But I could do dinner after, if you want. Caleb's heart rate kicked up. I want, but I've got Sophie tomorrow night. She'll be back from her sleepover around noon, and I'm making up for being a disaster of a parent lately by actually cooking dinner. Another time, then. Or you could come here. Silence. No typing indicator, just empty space where Victoria's response should be. Caleb winced. Too much too fast. Meeting the kid on day 1, or whatever number day this was, definitely qualified as rushing things. He was about to type a backtrack when Victoria's message appeared. You're inviting me to have dinner with you and your daughter at your house after one date. After getting trapped in an elevator during a thunderstorm, Caleb corrected, which I think counts for at least 3 regular dates. That's not how dating mathematics works. Pretty sure there's no official formula. Another pause. I don't know how to act around children. Sophie's easy. Just be honest and don't treat her like she's stupid. She'll tell you everything about her life within 5 minutes. What if she doesn't like me? She'll like you. Sophie likes everyone. It's a problem. What if I say the wrong thing? Then you apologize and we move on. It's not a test, Victoria. It's just dinner. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times. Caleb could practically hear Victoria's internal debate, the risk assessment, the worst-case scenarios, the urge to maintain control fighting against the possibility of something real. What time? She finally sent. Caleb grinned at his phone. 6:30. Fair warning, it'll probably be spaghetti because that's all I know how to make without burning the house down. I like spaghetti. And Sophie will talk your ear off about whatever book she's reading. I can handle that. And my house is a disaster because I haven't had time to clean in 2 weeks. Caleb, yeah? Stop trying to convince me not to come. It's not working. Caleb laughed and typed, okay, 6:30 tomorrow. I'll text you the address. I'll be there. They exchanged a few more messages, practical things like whether Victoria had food allergies, no, and whether Caleb needed her to bring anything, also no. Then Victoria said she needed to sleep before her board meeting, and they said goodnight with the kind of awkward sweetness that made Caleb feel like a teenager again. He sat at the kitchen table long after the conversation ended, coffee going cold in his mug, trying to process the fact that Victoria Sinclair was coming to his house for dinner tomorrow. Victoria, who ate alone in her office and didn't know how to be around kids and had built her entire life around being untouchable. This was either going to be amazing or catastrophic, possibly both. Caleb cleaned up the kitchen, mostly because having Victoria see the current state of things would probably give her hives, and then collapsed into bed. Sleep didn't come easy. His brain kept replaying the elevator, the conversation, the kiss, the terrifying honesty of their text exchange. He'd meant what he said about not having time for games. Sophie had to come first, always. But maybe there was room for something else, too. Maybe he didn't have to choose between being a good father and having a life. Maybe it was dangerous. Maybe led to hope. And hope had a tendency to disappoint. But Caleb was tired of playing it safe. He fell asleep sometime after 1 in the morning with his phone on the pillow next to him, like a teenager waiting for a text from his crush. The next morning arrived too early. Caleb dragged himself out of bed, showered, and drove to Emma's place to pick up Sophie. His sister opened the door with a knowing smirk that made Caleb immediately regret every life choice that had led to this moment. So, Emma said, heard you had an interesting night. Don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm just saying you spent 2 hours trapped in an elevator with Victoria Sinclair, and now you look like someone who got hit by a very confusing truck. Where's Sophie? Upstairs packing her stuff. She had a great time, by the way. Zero interest in your dramatic evening. Emma leaned against the doorframe, studying him. Are you okay? Actually, okay, not just pretending. Caleb sighed. I don't know. Maybe. I think I'm going insane. Because of Victoria? Because I invited her to dinner tonight and I have no idea what I'm doing. Emma's eyes went wide. You invited her to dinner? At our house? With Sophie? At my house, and yes, with Sophie. Caleb, that's a terrible idea, I know.
I was going to say fast, but also maybe not terrible. Emma looked uncertain, which was rare for her. I mean,
Victoria clearly did something right if you're willing to introduce her to Sophie this quickly. She didn't do anything right. We just talked. And it was honest and complicated, and I don't know how to walk away from it. Then don't. It's not that simple. There are policies and power dynamics and a dozen ways this could explode. Because Sophie's had enough instability in her life, and I can't risk... Stop, Emma interrupted. You're catastrophizing. I'm being realistic.
You're being scared. There's a difference. Emma stepped forward and grabbed his shoulders. Caleb, you've spent 3 years putting your entire life on hold for Sophie. You work yourself to death. You never go out. You don't date. You don't do anything for yourself. And now someone actually got through all those walls you built, and you're looking for reasons to sabotage it before it even starts. That's not what I'm doing, isn't it?
Caleb wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Because Emma was right. He was scared. Terrified, actually. Of letting Victoria in. Of letting Sophie get attached. Of building something fragile that could shatter at any moment. What if it doesn't work? He said quietly. What if it does? Before Caleb could respond, Sophie came thundering down the stairs with her overnight bag and a smile that could power a small city. Dad! She launched herself at him, and he caught her automatically, lifting her off the ground in a hug. You're here! Did you know that Maya has a hamster and it can do tricks? We taught it to go through a tunnel and everything. Can we get a hamster? We'll talk about it, Caleb said, which was code for absolutely not. Sophie pulled back and looked at him with suspicious eyes. You look weird. Thanks, kiddo. No, like weird good. Like something happened. Emma snorted. Caleb shot her a warning look that she ignored completely. Nothing happened, he said. Just a strange night with the storm. Speaking of which, we're having someone over for dinner tonight. Sophie's eyes lit up. Who? A friend of mine. Her name's Victoria. Is she nice? I think so, yeah. Does she like kids? Caleb hesitated. I'm not sure, but she's willing to try. Sophie absorbed this with the seriousness of an 8-year-old evaluating crucial information. Okay, can I show her my rock collection? I'm sure she'd love that. And my drawings? Maybe just a few. And tell her about my book? Sophie, let's not overwhelm her in the first 5 minutes. But I have so much to tell her, Emma laughed. Your daughter definitely gets the social skills from her mom's side. Caleb gathered Sophie's things and herded her toward the truck. Emma caught his arm before he could escape completely. Hey, she said quietly. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Victoria seems like she needs someone to remind her she's human, and you need someone who challenges you. We barely know each other. Well, you knew each other well enough to hold hands in an elevator. That's something. Caleb didn't have a response to that. He thanked Emma for watching Sophie, promised to call her later, and loaded his daughter into the truck. The drive home was filled with Sophie's continuous narration about the sleepover, the movies they'd watched, the fort they'd built, the elaborate story about Maya's hamster who was apparently destined for circus stardom. Caleb made appropriate noises at the right moments while his brain spun through dinner logistics. He had maybe 7 hours to clean the house, shop for ingredients that didn't come from a box, and figure out how to cook something that wouldn't poison anyone. Also, he needed to mentally prepare for the reality of Victoria Sinclair sitting at his kitchen table making conversation with an 8-year-old. No pressure. They got home and Caleb sent Sophie to unpack while he assessed the damage. The living room looked like a craft store had exploded. The kitchen was survivable, but needed work. Sophie's bathroom had toothpaste somehow on the ceiling. He had no idea how she'd managed that. Caleb spent the next 4 hours in a cleaning frenzy that Sophie occasionally interrupted with questions about whether Victoria liked pizza better than spaghetti. He didn't know. And if she had any, pets, also didn't know. And whether she was pretty, he deflected that one entirely. At 4 o'clock, he hit the grocery store and stood in the pasta aisle, having a minor crisis about whether to make spaghetti or try something more impressive and risk disaster. A woman in her 60s watched him stare at pasta boxes for 3 full minutes before taking pity. First date dinner? She asked. That obvious? You've got that look. My advice? Stick with what you know. Nobody ever broke up over decent spaghetti. Brskiwo ish yit patachwo. Caleb thanked her and grabbed the familiar box. Simple, manageable, hard to screw up. He got home, prepped everything he could in advance, and then stood in the kitchen second-guessing every decision he'd made in the past 24 hours. This was insane. He was inviting a woman he'd known for approximately 8 hours to have dinner with his daughter in a house that still showed visible signs of chaos despite his best efforts. Sophie appeared in the doorway wearing her favorite dress, purple with silver stars, and shoes that didn't match at all. "How do I look?" she asked, spinning. "Beautiful. Why are you dressed up?" "Because we have company. You're supposed to dress up for company." "Sophie, you don't have to. I want to make a good impression." Caleb's heart squeezed. "You always make a good impression. Kiddo, just be yourself." "That's what you said about school pictures, and I blinked in all of them. Those turned out great. Dad, I looked like I was sneezing. You looked perfect." Sophie rolled her eyes with the exasperation of a child dealing with a hopelessly biased parent. Then she noticed Caleb was still wearing jeans and a t-shirt. "You're not dressed up." "I'm cooking. I'll change after." "What if she gets here early?" "Then she'll see me in a t-shirt." "It's fine." "Dad," Sophie used her serious voice, "you have to make a good impression too." "Pull." Caleb looked at his daughter, 8 years old and already worried about his social presentation, and felt a wave of love so intense it hurt. "Okay, I'll change, but you have to promise me something." "What?" "Just be you tonight. Don't try to perform or impress anyone. Victoria's coming to meet us, not some perfect version of us. Deal?" Sophie considered this. "Deal. But I'm still showing her my rock collection." "I wouldn't expect anything less." Caleb went upstairs and changed into slightly nicer jeans and a button-down shirt that Emma had bought him last Christmas, specifically for occasions where he needed to look like an adult. He stared at himself in the bathroom mirror and tried to remember the last time he'd been this nervous about anything. His phone buzzed. A message from Victoria. "Still okay for tonight? I can cancel if you've reconsidered." "Ma!" Caleb typed back immediately. "Don't you dare. Sophie's already dressed up and planning to show you her rock collection. If you bail now, I'll never hear the end of it." Rock collection noted. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself, and maybe low expectations." "My expectations are already extremely low. You warned me about the spaghetti, remember? It's going to be great spaghetti. Possibly slightly burned, but great. I'm sure it will be perfect." Oh, the word perfect sat on his screen, loaded with irony. Nothing about tonight was going to be perfect. Caleb's house was still messy despite his best efforts. Sophie was going to talk nonstop about things Victoria probably didn't care about, and he was going to overcook the pasta because he always did. But maybe perfect wasn't the goal. Maybe good enough was actually good enough. At 6:15, Caleb heard a car pull into the driveway. Sophie ran to the window. "She's here! Dad, she's here, and she's driving a really nice car." "Okay. Remember what we talked about. Just be yourself." I know. The doorbell rang. Sophie looked at Caleb with wide eyes. "Should I get it?" "Let's get it together." They walked to the door and Caleb opened it to find Victoria standing on his front porch looking absolutely terrified. She'd changed out of her work clothes into jeans and a simple sweater, the most casual Caleb had ever seen her. Her hair was down instead of pulled back. She was holding a bottle of wine in one hand and a small bag in the other, and looked like she was contemplating whether running away was still a viable option. "Hi," Caleb said. "Hi," Victoria replied. They stared at each other for a beat too long before Sophie broke the silence. "Are you Victoria?" "I'm Sophie. Do you want to see my rock collection?" Victoria looked down at Sophie and something in her expression softened. "I would love to see your rock collection." "Come in!" Sophie grabbed Victoria's free hand and pulled her inside with the confidence of someone who'd never met a stranger. "I have 17 rocks total and 3 of them might be geodes, but Dad says we need to crack them open to know for sure." "Do you know anything about geodes?" "A little," Victoria said, and Caleb heard genuine interest in her voice. "I studied geology briefly in college." "Really? That's so cool! Come on, they're in my room. Well, most of them. Some are in the backyard because they're too dirty to bring inside, but I can show you those later." Victoria shot Caleb a slightly panicked look as Sophie dragged her toward the stairs. He mouthed sorry, and she mouthed back something that might have been help me before disappearing upstairs with his daughter. Caleb stood in the entryway, listening to Sophie's voice echo down from the second floor, a continuous stream of information about rocks and minerals and the trip to the science museum where she'd bought most of her collection. He heard Victoria making appropriate responses, asking questions, sounding genuinely engaged. This was either going to be the best decision he'd ever made or the most complicated. He was betting on complicated. Caleb gave them 10 minutes before heading upstairs to check on the situation. He found Victoria sitting cross-legged on Sophie's bedroom floor, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, sitting on carpet decorated with unicorns, while his daughter explained the mineral composition of quartz with the confidence of someone who'd watched exactly one YouTube video on the subject. And this one I found near the river, but Dad says it's probably just glass, but I think it's special anyway because look how it catches the light. Sophie held up a smooth green piece that was definitely just glass.
It's very pretty, Victoria said diplomatically. Sophie beamed. Do you have any rocks? Not currently. I live in an apartment that doesn't really accommodate collections. That's so sad. Everyone should have rocks. Sophie stood up and grabbed a small purple stone from her dresser. Here, you can have this one. It's amethyst. Well, probably. I got it at the museum gift shop, so it might be fake, but it's still nice. Victoria took the stone like Sophie had just handed her something precious. Are you sure? Yeah, you're Dad's friend, so that makes you my friend too, and friends share rocks. Something crossed Victoria's face, surprise mixed with something softer that Caleb couldn't quite name. She closed her fingers around the stone carefully. Thank you, Sophie. I'll keep it somewhere safe. You should put it on your desk at work. Then when you have boring meetings, you can look at it and think about something cool instead. Victoria's lips twitched. That's actually excellent advice. Caleb cleared his throat from the doorway. Sophie, why don't you let Victoria breathe for a minute? Dinner's almost ready. But I haven't shown her my drawings yet. After dinner. What about my book report? Also after dinner. Sophie sighed dramatically. Fine. But Victoria, you have to promise to look at my drawings. I did one of a dragon that's really good. I promise, Victoria said, and she sounded like she meant it. They headed downstairs, Sophie maintaining a running commentary about everything in the house. The crack in the ceiling that looked like a rabbit, the wobbly third step that you had to skip, the kitchen table that used to be her grandma's. Victoria listened with apparent fascination, asking questions that seemed genuinely interested rather than politely obligatory. Caleb served dinner while Sophie explained her current reading obsession, something involving wizards and a magical school that Caleb had lost track of around book 3. Victoria nodded along, and Caleb caught her sneaking glances at him across the table when Sophie wasn't looking. The spaghetti was only slightly overcooked. Victory. So Victoria, Sophie said around a mouthful of pasta that Caleb would definitely lecture her about later. What do you do for your job? I run a company, Victoria said carefully. What kind of company? We handle logistics and distribution. Basically, we help move products from where they're made to where people buy them. Sophie considered this. Like Amazon? Similar concept, smaller scale. Do you like it? Victoria paused, fork halfway to her mouth. Caleb watched her navigate the question. How much truth to give an 8-year-old? How much to simplify? Most days, Victoria said finally, it's challenging and sometimes stressful, but I'm good at it. Dad's good at his job too, Sophie said loyally. He works really hard. Sometimes he's too tired to cook, so we have cereal for dinner, but that's okay because I like cereal. Caleb felt his face heat. Sophie, what? We do have cereal sometimes. Yes, but we don't need to announce it to guests. Victoria's not a guest. She's a friend. Sophie turned back to Victoria with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Do you have kids? No, Victoria said quietly. Do you want kids? Sophie, Caleb warned, that's personal. I'm just asking. It's all right, Victoria said. She met Sophie's eyes directly. I don't know if I want kids. I never thought I'd be good at it. Why not?
Because I didn't have great examples growing up. My parents weren't around much. Some nods. Sophie absorbed this with the gravity of someone receiving important information. That's sad. Parents are supposed to be around. Like Dad. He's always around. Even when he's tired, he still reads to me at bedtime and helps with homework and comes to my soccer games even though I'm terrible at soccer. You're not terrible, Caleb interjected. Dad. I scored on our own goal last week. That was an accident. It was a really big accident. Victoria laughed. A genuine sound that made both Sophie and Caleb stare. It transformed her face completely, stripped away the CEO armor, revealed someone younger and more unguarded underneath. I like you, Sophie announced. You laugh like a real person. As opposed to what? Victoria asked. I don't know, a robot? Some of Dad's friends from work don't laugh right. They do that fake thing where they're just being polite. Sophie sees through everything, Caleb explained. It's a problem. It's a gift, Sophie corrected. She pointed her fork at Victoria. You're not fake. I can tell. Victoria looked genuinely touched. Thank you, I think. They finished dinner with Sophie continuing her interrogation. Favorite color? Victoria said blue. Sophie approved. Favorite food? Victoria admitted to a weakness for Chinese takeout. Sophie declared they should all get some together sometime. Whether Victoria believed in aliens, undecided, which Sophie found acceptable. Caleb watched them interact and felt something complicated happening in his chest. Sophie was happy, more animated than she'd been in months. And Victoria, despite her earlier terror, seemed to be actually enjoying herself. After dinner, Sophie dragged Victoria to the living room to see the promised drawings while Caleb cleaned up. He could hear them talking. Sophie's enthusiastic explanations, Victoria's thoughtful questions. At one point, Sophie laughed so hard she snorted, which made Victoria laugh again. Caleb was loading the dishwasher when his phone rang. Emma. He almost didn't answer, then figured she'd just keep calling. How's it going? She asked immediately. Fine. Good, actually. Sophie likes her. Sophie loves her. They've been talking about rocks and dragons for the past hour. And you? Caleb glanced toward the living room. Through the doorway, he could see Victoria sitting on the floor next to Sophie, examining a drawing with apparent seriousness. I think I'm in trouble, Em. Good trouble or bad trouble? I don't know yet. Both, maybe. Well, take your time figuring it out. And Caleb? Yeah? I'm proud of you for trying. Emma hung up before he could respond. Caleb finished the dishes and joined Victoria and Sophie in the living room. Sophie was showing off her dragon drawing, a purple creature with too many legs and what appeared to be laser eyes. It's anatomically creative, Victoria said diplomatically. That means it's weird, right? Sophie asked. That means it's imaginative. Dad says that too when my drawings are weird. Ox, your drawings aren't weird, Caleb said, settling onto the couch. They're unique. That's also what people say when things are weird. Sophie yawned suddenly, big and jaw-cracking. But I don't care. I like weird things. It's almost 8, Caleb said. Bedtime. But Victoria just got here. Victoria's been here for over an hour and you need sleep. Sophie looked ready to argue, then redirected. Will you come back? She asked Victoria. To visit again? Victoria glanced at Caleb, something uncertain in her expression. He gave a small nod. I'd like that, Victoria said. If it's okay with your dad. It's okay with me if it's okay with him, Sophie said. Dad? Is it okay? It's okay, Caleb confirmed. Good. Then it's settled. Sophie stood up and walked directly to Victoria, wrapping her arms around her in a hug that Victoria clearly hadn't expected. Thank you for being nice to my dad. He needs more friends. Victoria's arms came up slowly to return the hug, awkward but genuine. Thank you for showing me your rocks. Sophie released her and headed for the stairs, calling back, Dad, don't forget to read. I won't forget. And Victoria, you should stay for a while. Dad likes company, even though he pretends he doesn't. Then she was gone, thundering up the stairs with the energy of someone who'd definitely be asleep within 10 minutes. Caleb and Victoria sat in the sudden quiet. The living room felt bigger without Sophie's presence filling it. She's incredible, Victoria said quietly. Yeah, she is. You're raising an amazing kid, Caleb.
I'm trying. Most days I feel like I'm just barely keeping ahead of complete disaster. She doesn't see it that way. She sees someone who shows up, who tries. That matters more than perfection. Caleb studied Victoria. You're good with her. Better than you think, Bashas. I was terrified the entire time. Couldn't tell. I almost ran back to my car twice. Once when she grabbed my hand, once when she hugged me. Victoria looked down at her hands. I'm not used to people just trusting me like that. No agenda, no calculation. She just decided I was safe and ran with it. That's Sophie. She's got her mom's instincts about people. Then her mom was very wise. They fell into comfortable silence. Caleb could hear Sophie moving around upstairs, the familiar sounds of her bedtime routine. In a few minutes, he'd need to go up and read to her. But right now, he wanted to stay exactly where he was. I should probably go, Victoria said, making no move to stand. Probably. I have an early meeting tomorrow. What time? 7. Caleb checked his watch. It's 8:15. You've got time. Victoria smiled. Are you trying to keep me here? Is it working? Maybe. They looked at each other across the living room, Caleb on the couch, Victoria still on the floor, surrounded by Sophie's drawings. The moment stretched, loaded with things neither of them knew how to say. Dad! Sophie's voice carried down from upstairs. I'm ready! Coming! Caleb called back. He looked at Victoria. I need to. I know. Go. You could stay. If you want. Just until I'm done reading. I'd like that. Caleb headed upstairs, leaving Victoria in the living room. Sophie was already in bed, her current book clutched in her hands. What chapter? Caleb asked, settling into the chair next to her bed. 12. The one where they find the secret passage. Caleb read, putting on different voices for different characters the way he always did. Sophie listened with rapt attention, even though they both knew she'd probably read ahead already. When he finished the chapter, she was fighting to keep her eyes open. Dad? She murmured. Yeah, kiddo? I like Victoria. She's not like other grown-ups. How so? Equal. She listens like she actually cares, not just waiting for her turn to talk. Sophie yawned. And she looked at my rocks for real, not just pretending to be interested. Caleb smoothed back her hair. She's pretty special. Are you going to marry her? Caleb nearly choked. What? Sophie, we just met. But you like her, I can tell. How can you tell? You smile different when you look at her, like you're happy but also scared. 8 years old and already reading him like a book. Caleb didn't know whether to be impressed or concerned. It's complicated, Soph. Adult stuff usually is. That's what grown-ups say when they don't want to explain things. Okay, fair, but the truth is I don't know what's going to happen with Victoria. We're friends right now, maybe more eventually. But it's new and we're figuring it out. Just don't mess it up, Sophie said seriously, because I like her and I don't want her to go away. I'll do my best. Promise? Promise. Sophie's eyes drifted closed. Within minutes, her breathing evened out into sleep. Caleb sat there for a moment longer, watching his daughter and feeling the weight of her words. Don't mess it up. Simple request. Impossible task. He headed back downstairs to find Victoria standing near the bookshelf, examining the framed photos Caleb kept there. She was looking at one of Sophie and her mom, taken maybe 6 months before the accident, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. She had a beautiful smile, Victoria said quietly. Yeah, Sophie got that from her. What was her name? Rachel. Would she approve of me being here? Caleb considered the question seriously. Rachel always wanted me to be happy. She made me promise before she died that I wouldn't shut down, that I'd let people in. He moved to stand next to Victoria, but she also would have terrified you with questions and probably embarrassed me within 5 minutes. She sounds wonderful. Banan basos. She was. She really was. Caleb took a breath. But she's gone. And I spent 3 years trying to honor her memory by being exactly what she asked. Open, present, available for Sophie. But I stopped being available for myself. Stopped thinking I deserved anything beyond surviving. Victoria turned to face him. And now, Now I'm standing in my living room with someone who makes me want to try again. Someone who scares me and challenges me and somehow makes sense even though none of this should work. It really shouldn't work, Victoria agreed. I'm your CEO. You have a daughter. I don't know how to do relationships. The power dynamics alone are a nightmare. And yet here you are. Here I am. Victoria stepped closer. Caleb, I need you to understand something. I don't know how to do this. Any of this. The dating, the meeting your kid, the letting someone see behind the armor. I've spent my entire adult life being untouchable because it was safer. And now you're asking me to be vulnerable, and I don't know if I can do it without falling apart. I'm not asking you to be anything except honest. What if honest isn't enough? What if it's everything? They were inches apart now. Victoria's eyes were bright with something that looked like fear mixed with hope, mixed with determination. I'm going to mess this up, she said quietly. I'm going to work too much and forget to call and panic when things get hard because that's what I do. I'm going to disappoint you. And I'm going to overreact and make decisions based on emotion and probably challenge you in front of other people because I don't know how to turn that off. I'm going to frustrate you. We're a disaster waiting to happen. Probably. So why are we doing this? Lisette. Caleb reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Because when we were trapped in that elevator, I felt more alive than I have in 3 years. Because you told Sophie the truth instead of what you thought she wanted to hear. Because you're sitting here admitting you're scared instead of pretending you have all the answers. Those are terrible reasons. They're honest reasons. Victoria laughed softly. You're impossible. You've mentioned that. She kissed him then, less tentative than in the car, more certain. Caleb pulled her closer and let himself fall into it, into the terrifying possibility that this might actually work. When they broke apart, Victoria rested her forehead against his. I have to go, she whispered. Early meeting. I know, but I don't want to. So stay 5 more minutes. They stood there in the quiet living room, holding each other like teenagers, until Victoria's phone alarm went off, reminding her she needed to actually leave if she wanted any sleep before her 7 a.m. meeting. Caleb walked her to the door. Victoria grabbed her jacket and the small bag she'd brought, still sitting on the entry table where she'd left it hours ago. I almost forgot, she said, handing him the bag. For Sophie. I saw it and thought of her. Caleb opened the bag to find a book about rocks and minerals, glossy photos, detailed explanations, clearly expensive. Victoria, this is too much. It's a book, and she'll actually appreciate it, which is more than I can say for most gifts I've given. Victoria paused at the door. Thank you for tonight, for letting me into your life, your home, for trusting me with Sophie. Thank you for showing up scared and doing it anyway. She smiled, that real smile that made her look 10 years younger. Text me? Every day if you want. I want. One more quick kiss, and then Victoria was gone, walking to her car while Caleb stood in the doorway watching. She waved before driving away, and Caleb waved back feeling like something fundamental had shifted in his life. He closed the door and leaned against it, processing. His phone buzzed immediately. Emma. How did it go? Good. Really good, actually. Sophie liked her? Sophie loved her, gave her a rock from her collection, and everything. That's serious. Sophie doesn't give rocks to just anyone. Emma paused. And you? I'm terrified and excited and have no idea what I'm doing. Sounds about right for falling in love. I'm not falling in... Caleb stopped. Was he? It was too soon. They barely knew each other. Falling in love required time and stability and certainty, none of which applied to whatever this was. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Victoria sitting on Sophie's floor examining fake geodes, heard her laughing at dinner, felt her forehead pressed against his in the living room. Oh no, he said out loud. Emma laughed. Welcome to the disaster, little brother. Try to enjoy the ride. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern that felt both natural and completely surreal. Victoria texted Caleb every morning, usually something brief about her schedule or a comment about her terrible coffee. He responded with updates about Sophie or pictures of whatever minor catastrophe had struck the household. The conversations were mundane and ordinary, and Caleb looked forward to them with an intensity that probably wasn't healthy. They managed dinner twice more.
Once at a restaurant that Victoria insisted on choosing, somewhere nicer than Caleb would have picked, but not so expensive that he felt completely out of place. Once at Caleb's house again with Sophie, who'd apparently adopted Victoria as her new favorite person, and spent the entire evening showing off her improved rock collection and the book Victoria had given her. Work got weird. Not in the obvious ways, Victoria maintained perfect professional distance at the office, never acknowledging their relationship in any public setting. But Caleb found himself noticing her in ways he hadn't before. The way she held herself during meetings, the careful control in her voice when she was frustrated, the tiny crack in her armor when someone challenged her. And sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, she'd glance in his direction and something soft would cross her face before the mask came back. They were careful. Probably too careful. But Galway Industries had strict policies about relationships between executives and subordinate employees, and neither of them wanted to trigger an HR investigation before they'd figured out what they even were to each other. 3 weeks in, everything changed. Caleb was finishing his shift when his supervisor called him into the office. Martinez looked uncomfortable, which was never a good sign. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked. "There's an audit happening. Corporate sent people down this morning to review financial records for the warehouse division." "Okay, why are you telling me this?" Martinez hesitated. "Because your name came up. Something about discrepancies in equipment purchases and shipping manifests over the past 6 months. They're asking questions about expense reports you signed off on." Caleb felt ice slide down his spine. "I sign off on expense reports every week. That's part of my job." "I know. But apparently some of the purchases don't match inventory records. Like equipment was ordered and paid for but never actually delivered." "That doesn't make sense. I check every delivery personally. I'm just telling you what I heard. They want to interview you tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Bring any documentation you have about equipment orders and be prepared to explain the discrepancies." Caleb left the office feeling like the floor had dropped out from under him. He drove home on autopilot, mind spinning through every expense report he'd signed in the past 6 months. He was careful about that stuff, obsessive even. He'd learned early that small mistakes could snowball into big problems, so he triple-checked everything. But if corporate was finding discrepancies, that meant someone had screwed up, and they were looking at him as the source. His phone buzzed. "Victoria, dinner this week? I have Thursday free." Caleb stared at the text. He should tell her what was happening. She was the CEO. She probably already knew about the audit, but something stopped him. If this turned into a real problem, if there was actual evidence of financial misconduct, he didn't want to put Victoria in a position where she had to choose between defending him and protecting the company. He texted back, "Thursday works. My place? Alls. Perfect. See you then." Caleb spent the next 24 hours buried in paperwork. Every expense report from the past 6 months, every equipment order, every shipping manifest. He cross-referenced everything twice, looking for the discrepancies Martinez had mentioned, and found them. 3 major equipment orders: warehouse forklifts, industrial shelving, upgraded loading dock equipment, totaling almost $200,000. All approved, all paid for, all supposedly delivered to the warehouse. None of it was actually there. Caleb stared at the document spread across his kitchen table and felt panic claw at his throat. Someone had ordered equipment, had it approved, submitted invoices showing delivery, and made it all disappear. And every single approval signature was his. His phone rang, a number he didn't recognize. "Hello? Mr. Mercer? This is Diana Chen from Galway Industries Corporate Compliance. I'm calling to confirm your interview tomorrow at 9 a.m. regarding financial irregularities in the warehouse division." "I'll be there." "Excellent. Please bring any documentation related to equipment purchases from March through September. And Mr. Mercer, I'd advise you to consider whether you want legal representation present during the interview." The line went dead. Caleb sat in his kitchen, surrounded by evidence that made him look guilty, and tried to figure out how his life had gone from finally good to completely destroyed in less than 24 hours. His phone buzzed again. "Victoria, everything okay? You've been quiet today." Caleb wanted to tell her everything, wanted to ask for help, for advice, for some sign that this wasn't going to cost him everything he'd built. But Victoria was the CEO of the company that was investigating him. Getting her involved would only make things worse. He typed, "Fine, just busy. Talk later?" "Of course." "Yes." Caleb put his phone face down on the table and dropped his head into his hands. Sophie was at Emma's for the night, a previously scheduled sleepover that now felt like a blessing. At least she didn't have to see him falling apart. He spent the night reviewing documents, looking for any explanation that didn't involve someone deliberately framing him. Found nothing. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Caleb Mercer had approved purchases for equipment that had never been delivered, and someone had pocketed the money. The interview the next morning was worse than he'd imagined. 2 corporate compliance officers and an HR representative, all wearing expressions that suggested they'd already decided he was guilty and were just going through the motions of gathering evidence. They walked him through each discrepancy, asked him to explain signatures on documents he didn't remember seeing, showed him invoices from suppliers he'd never heard of, built a case that made him look either incompetent or criminal, and Caleb couldn't figure out which was worse. "Mr. Mercer," Diana Chen said after 2 hours of questions, "do you understand the severity of these allegations? We're looking at potential fraud exceeding $200,000. If we determine you were involved, either through negligence or intent, termination would be the minimum consequence. Criminal charges are also on the table." "I didn't steal anything," Caleb said for what felt like the 100th time. "I don't know how those invoices got approved, but I didn't approve them. Someone forged my signature or hacked my credentials, or you're lying," the HR representative interrupted. "Mr. Mercer, you've been vocal about your dissatisfaction with company policies. You publicly challenged CEO Sinclair regarding warehouse conditions. You have financial difficulties. We're aware you're raising a daughter on a single income. The motive is clear." "I challenged policies I thought were wrong. That doesn't make me a criminal." It establishes a pattern of insubordination and potential resentment. Caleb wanted to argue, but what was the point? They'd already made up their minds. He was being set up, and whoever had done it had been careful enough that he couldn't prove his innocence. "We're suspending you pending the outcome of the investigation," Chen said, "effective immediately. You're not to enter company property or contact any Galway employees except through official channels. Your access credentials have been deactivated. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Good. We'll be in touch regarding next steps. You're free to go." Caleb walked out of the building in a daze. Suspended. Possibly about to be fired. Potentially facing criminal charges. And the worst part was knowing that somewhere, someone was watching this happen and enjoying it. His phone buzzed. Emma. "Sophie wants to know if she can stay another night. They're having so much fun. Is that okay?" Caleb texted back, "Yeah, that's fine." At least Sophie wouldn't have to see him like this. He drove home and sat in his truck in the driveway trying to figure out his next move. He needed a lawyer. Needed to find evidence that cleared his name. Needed to figure out who'd set him up and why. His phone rang. Victoria. Caleb stared at her name on the screen, debating whether to answer. Part of him wanted to tell her everything, to hear her say it would be okay. The other part knew that getting Victoria involved would only make things worse for both of them. He answered. "Hey, Vor," Victoria said. "I just heard about the suspension. Caleb, what's going on?" "You heard? I'm the CEO. Of course I heard." Her voice was tight with something Caleb couldn't identify. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you're the CEO. Because I didn't want to put you in an impossible position." "But an impossible position. Caleb, they're accusing you of fraud. That's not something you hide from someone you're—" She stopped. "From someone who cares about you." "I'm being set up, Victoria. Someone forged approvals and invoices and made it look like I stole $200,000, and I can't prove it wasn't me." Silence on the other end. Then, "I believe you." "You do?" "Yes. You're a lot of things, Caleb, but you're not a thief. And you're too careful to make mistakes this big." Victoria's voice shifted into the CEO tone he recognized. "I'm going to look into this quietly. If someone's framing you, there will be evidence." "Victoria, you can't—" "Yes, I can, and I will. Nobody manipulates my company and gets away with it. If you defend me publicly, it's going to look bad. Like you're protecting me because we're
Whatever we are. I'm aware of the optics. And you're going to do it anyway? I'm going to find the truth, Victoria corrected. What I do with it depends on what I find.
Caleb closed his eyes.
This is going to get messy. Everything about us is messy, Caleb. This is just one more thing.
I don't want you to risk your career for me. And I don't want you to face false accusations alone.
So we're both going to be disappointed. Victoria paused. Are you okay? Actually okay?
No, Caleb admitted. I'm terrified. If they fire me, I lose my income. If they press charges, I could lose custody of Sophie. This isn't just my career, Victoria. It's everything.
Then we make sure that doesn't happen.
Her voice was steel wrapped in determination. I'll call you later. And Caleb, eat.
Yeah? Don't do anything stupid while I'm working on this. No confronting people. No rogue investigations. Let me handle it. I don't know how to just sit and wait.
Learn. Because if you make this worse, I can't help you. Mukbamum. She hung up. Caleb sat in his truck and tried to breathe through the panic. Victoria believed him. That should have been comforting. Instead, it was terrifying because now she was putting herself in the line of fire. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. You should have kept your mouth shut about warehouse conditions. Some lessons have to be learned the hard way. Caleb stared at the message. Someone had set him up deliberately. Someone who wanted revenge for him challenging company policies, and they were bragging about it. He screenshotted the message and forwarded it to Victoria. Then he got out of his truck and went inside to wait for his life to either fall apart or somehow, impossibly, come back together. Victoria called back 20 minutes later, her voice clipped and dangerous in a way Caleb had never heard before. I need you to forward me every email, every expense report, every piece of documentation you have related to those equipment orders. Everything. Don't leave anything out.
Victoria, and I need you to think very carefully about who had access to your credentials. Who could have logged in as you to approve fraudulent invoices?
Caleb's mind spun through possibilities. Half the warehouse management team has access to the shared terminals. We all use the same login stations for efficiency. It's not exactly secure. That's a problem we'll address later. Right now, give me names. Martinez, Chen, Davidson, and Reynolds. They're all supervisors with the same clearance level I have. Anyone else? Upper management has override access. Regional directors, VP of operations, corporate compliance. Caleb paused. And you? Obviously not me, Victoria said dryly, but someone in that chain wanted you gone badly enough to commit fraud. The text message you forwarded suggests this is personal. Who did you piss off, Caleb? Besides you? I'm serious. Caleb thought back through the past year, the warehouse restructuring, the public challenge during the Q&A session, the written warning that had followed. After I called you out about the benefit cuts, I got pulled into a disciplinary meeting. It wasn't just HR. There was a VP there, Richard Hartley. He told me I was lucky to still have a job and that if I ever undermined company leadership again, I'd be gone. Hartley, Victoria's voice went cold. He's been with the company for 15 years. Old guard. Hated when I took over as CEO. You think he did this? I think he had motive and access. Whether he actually did it is what I'm going to find out. She paused. Caleb, I need you to stay away from this. Don't contact anyone at the company. Don't try to investigate on your own. Let me handle it. I can't just sit here while my life falls apart. Yes, you can. Because if you show up at the office making accusations, it'll only make you look guilty. Trust me to do my job. Your job is running the company, not protecting me. My job, Victoria said sharply, is making sure my company isn't being used as a weapon by someone with a grudge. That happens to overlap with protecting you. Take the win. She hung up before Caleb could argue. He sat in his kitchen, surrounded by paperwork that proved nothing except that he was either guilty or incredibly unlucky, and tried to figure out how to trust Victoria when trusting anyone felt impossible right now. His phone rang again. Sophie this time, calling from Emma's. Dad, guess what? Emma said we can go to the Science Museum tomorrow if you say it's okay. Can we? Please? Caleb forced lightness into his voice. Yeah, kiddo, that sounds great.
Are you okay? You sound weird. I'm fine, just tired. Did something happen at work? Sophie had her mother's instincts.
Knew when Caleb was hiding things, even when he thought he was doing a good job of it. He debated how much to tell her, settled on a version of the truth that wouldn't terrify an 8-year-old.
There's some confusion about paperwork at the office. I'm taking a few days off while they sort it out. Like a vacation? Sort of. Cool. Then you can come to the museum with us. Maybe. We'll see. They talked for a few more minutes about rocks and the museum exhibit Sophie wanted to see. When they hung up,
Caleb felt the weight of everything pressing down harder. Sophie deserved better than a father who might lose his job and face criminal charges. She deserved stability and certainty and a parent who had his life together. Instead, she got him. Caleb spent the rest of the day compiling documentation for Victoria. Every email, every approval, every shipping manifest. He sent it all in one massive file and then forced himself to stop obsessing. Victoria had told him to stay out of it. The smart move was listening. The problem was Caleb had never been good at smart moves. He pulled up the employee directory on his personal laptop, access he technically still had since the suspension was administrative, not a complete termination. Found Richard Hartley's office number, stared at it for a long minute. This was stupid. Victoria had explicitly told him not to investigate. But sitting in his house doing nothing while someone destroyed his life felt impossible. Caleb picked up his phone and called. Hartley answered on the third ring. "This is Richard. Whoa. It's Caleb Mercer. We need to talk." Silence. Then, "I don't think that's appropriate, Mr. Mercer. You're currently under investigation, and I've been advised not to discuss the matter with you." Funny how you knew exactly what I was calling about. It's not exactly a secret. The entire warehouse division knows about the suspension. Heats. Right. The suspension that happened because someone forged my credentials and made it look like I committed fraud. Caleb kept his voice level. Someone who had access to override my approvals. Someone who wanted revenge for me challenging company policies. I don't know what you're implying. Yes, you do. You told me after the disciplinary meeting that if I ever undermined leadership again, I'd be gone. Looks like you made good on that threat. Hartley's voice went cold. You have no proof of anything, and making accusations you can't support will only make your situation worse. I have a text message from an unknown number telling me I should have kept my mouth shut, that some lessons have to be learned the hard way. Could have come from anyone. Could have, but it came right after the suspension, almost like someone was celebrating. This conversation is over, Mr. Mercer. And if you continue making baseless accusations, I'll have no choice but to report it to HR as harassment. The line went dead. Caleb sat there, adrenaline pumping, knowing he'd just done exactly what Victoria told him not to do. But Hartley's reaction confirmed everything. The defensiveness, the threats. The man was guilty and not even trying very hard to hide it. His phone rang immediately. Victoria. Did you just call Richard Hartley? Aki. Caleb winced. How did you... Because he called me 30 seconds ago claiming you're harassing him and making wild accusations. Victoria's voice was tight with controlled fury. I specifically told you not to investigate. What part of that was unclear? The part where I'm supposed to sit quietly while someone destroys my life. You confronted a VP based on a hunch. Do you have any idea how much harder you just made this? He's guilty, Victoria. I heard it in his voice. I don't care what you heard. You need actual evidence, not instinct. She took a breath, clearly trying to calm down. Caleb, I'm trying to help you. But I can't do that if you keep making impulsive decisions that undermine the investigation. So what am I supposed to do? Nothing? Yes, exactly that. Let me handle this. And if you can't find evidence? If Hartley covered his tracks too well? Then what? Victoria went quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. Then we figure out plan B. But we haven't hit that point yet. I've been going through financial records all day. I'm close to something. I can feel it. But I need time. How much time? I don't know. A few days, maybe a week. I don't have a week, Victoria. If they decide to press charges, I could lose Sophie. Do you understand that? Child Protective Services doesn't look kindly on parents facing felony fraud allegations. I know. Her voice cracked slightly.
I know what's at stake, Caleb, which is why I'm working as fast as I can. But you have to trust me. Caleb closed his eyes. I'm scared. Me too. What if we can't fix this? Then we face it together. But we're not at that point yet. So please, just give me time to do this right. They sat in silence on the phone, neither wanting to hang up. Finally, Victoria said, I have to go. Emergency board meeting about the audit, but I'll call you tonight. D. Okay. And Caleb? No more rogue phone calls to suspects. No promises. I'm serious. So am I, but I'll try. That's all I can ask. Victoria hung up. Caleb sat in his kitchen feeling like he was trapped in another elevator, except this time the emergency lights were off, and he couldn't see a way out. 3 days passed. 3 days of Caleb pretending everything was fine when Sophie came home from Emma's. 3 days of watching his daughter show him things from the museum and talk about school while he smiled, and nodded and tried not to think about what would happen if he lost his job and couldn't pay rent. Victoria called every night with updates. She'd found irregularities in Hartley's expense reports, discovered he'd been skimming money from multiple departments, not just the warehouse. Built a case that was solid, but not quite enough to prove he'd framed Caleb specifically. I need a direct connection, she said on the third night. Something that ties Hartley to those specific fraudulent invoices. Right now I can prove he's corrupt. I can't prove he set you up. Yee. What about the text message I got? Anonymous. Could have been sent from anywhere. Hartley's smart enough not to use his own phone. So we're stuck. We're close. There's something in the digital trail. I can see the shape of it, but I can't quite... Victoria trailed off. I'm missing something. Some piece that connects everything. Caleb thought back through every interaction he'd had with Hartley over the past year. The disciplinary meeting, the occasional tense encounters in the warehouse when Hartley did site inspections, the time Hartley had insisted on personally reviewing Caleb's expense reports after the restructuring incident. Wait, he reviewed my reports, Caleb said suddenly, after I challenged you publicly. Hartley said it was standard protocol following a disciplinary action, but he went through 6 months of my expense history personally. I thought he was looking for mistakes to use against me. He was learning your approval patterns, Victoria said, excitement creeping into her voice. Building a profile so he could forge approvals that looked legitimate. When did this happen? Last March, right after the disciplinary meeting. That's 2 months before the first fraudulent invoice. Victoria went quiet, and Caleb could practically hear her brain working. If he reviewed your records personally, there will be access logs, digital footprints showing when he logged into your file. And if the timing matches up with the fraudulent approvals, then you have your connection. I need to go. I'll call you back. She hung up. Caleb paced his kitchen, hoping desperately that this was the break they needed. An hour passed, then 2. His phone stayed silent. Finally, at almost midnight, Victoria called. I found it. Her voice was triumphant. Hartley accessed your personnel files 17 times between March and September. Every single access corresponds to a date within 48 hours of a fraudulent invoice being submitted. He was studying your approval signatures, learning the pattern, then forging documents that matched your style. That's enough? Combined with the financial irregularities in his own accounts and the timeline of the disciplinary action? Yes, it's enough. Victoria paused. I'm calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. I'm going to present everything, the fraud, the setup, all of it. And I'm going to recommend Hartley's immediate termination and criminal investigation. But what about me? Full reinstatement, back pay for the suspension period, and a formal apology from the company. Her voice softened. You're clear, Caleb. It's over. Caleb felt his knees go weak. He sat down hard on a kitchen chair and tried to breathe through the relief. You did it. We did it. You gave me the final piece. I also made it harder by calling Hartley directly. Yeah, you did. Don't do that again. No promises. Victoria laughed, tired but real. I need to prep for the board meeting. But Caleb? Yeah? Thank you for trusting me. I know it wasn't easy.
Thank you for believing me when everyone else assumed I was guilty. I told you, you're a lot of things, but you're not a thief. They said goodnight. Caleb sat in his kitchen until well after midnight, just breathing and existing and letting himself believe that maybe everything was going to be okay. The board meeting happened the next morning. Caleb wasn't there. Wasn't allowed to be since it involved executive personnel matters. But Victoria called him afterward and recounted the whole thing with satisfaction in her voice. Hartley tried to deny it, said the access logs were circumstantial, that reviewing your file was standard protocol. Victoria sounded almost gleeful. Then I pulled up his personal expense reports and showed the board how he'd been embezzling for at least 3 years. Different departments, different methods, but the pattern was clear. He'd gotten greedy and sloppy. What did the board do? I terminated him immediately. Called the police. He's being charged with fraud and embezzlement. They're estimating he stole close to $500,000 over 3 years. And me? Full reinstatement effective immediately. The board voted to offer you a promotion to warehouse operations manager with a significant salary increase. Partially as an apology, partially because they're impressed you caught discrepancies their own auditors missed. Caleb blinked. A promotion? You're good at your job, Caleb, and you're honest, which apparently is rarer than it should be in corporate management. Victoria paused. There's one complication. What? The promotion means you report directly to me, which makes our relationship even more problematic from an HR perspective. Sugi? So what do we do? I've disclosed everything to the board, our relationship, the potential conflict of interest, all of it. Victoria's voice was steady. I gave them 3 options. 1, you take the promotion and we end our personal relationship. 2, you decline the promotion and stay in your current role so there's no direct reporting conflict. 3, you take the promotion and we continue our relationship but with strict oversight and transparency protocols. Caleb's throat tightened. What did you recommend? I told them the decision was yours, that I wouldn't ask you to choose between your career and your personal life. She took a breath. But for what it's worth, I want option 3, if you want it too. What does option 3 look like? Regular ethics reviews. Disclosure of our relationship to all relevant parties. Someone else handles your performance evaluations to avoid bias. Basically, we make everything transparent so no one can accuse us of impropriety. That sounds complicated. Everything about us is complicated. Caleb thought about Victoria sitting on Sophie's floor looking at rocks. Thought about holding hands in an elevator. Thought about the past 3 days of Victoria fighting for him when she could have just protected herself. Option 3, he said, if they'll allow it. They already approved it, contingent on your acceptance. Victoria's voice warmed. Welcome back, Caleb. Your first day as operations manager starts Monday. I don't know what to say. Say you'll have dinner with me tonight. Celebrate properly. I have Sophie. Bring her. We'll go somewhere she likes. She's going to be insufferable when she finds out we're officially together. I can handle insufferable. I work in corporate management. Caleb laughed, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. Tonight then, 6:30? I'll be there. They hung up. Caleb immediately called Emma to tell her everything. His sister screamed so loud he had to pull the phone away from his ear. I told you, Emma crowed. I told you Victoria was perfect for you. You set up a blind date. You didn't predict any of this. I predicted chemistry. The rest is just details. Emma paused. Are you happy, Caleb? Actually happy? He thought about it. Thought about Victoria and Sophie getting along. About having a job that paid enough that he didn't have to work doubles every week. About not being alone anymore. Yeah, he said. I think I am. Good. You deserve it. That night, Caleb took Sophie and Victoria to a diner that Sophie loved. One of those places with checkered floors and unlimited fries and milkshakes that came in metal cups. Victoria looked hilariously out of place in her business casual clothes, sitting in a vinyl booth across from an 8-year-old who was explaining the intricacies of the restaurant's dessert menu. The brownie sundae is the best, but only if you get it with peanut butter ice cream, not vanilla, Sophie said seriously. Trust me on this. I trust you, Victoria said. Peanut butter ice cream it is. And Dad always gets the banana split, but he never finishes it, so we end up sharing. That's because the banana split is enormous, Caleb protested. You just have weak dessert endurance. Victoria snorted. Sophie looked delighted at making her laugh. They ordered burgers and fries and the recommended desserts. Sophie talked nonstop about school and her rock collection and the upcoming science fair where she was planning to build a volcano. Victoria listened with genuine interest, asked questions, made suggestions about volcanic rock formations that sent Sophie into spirals of excitement. Caleb watched them together and felt something settle in his chest. This was real, messy and imperfect and real. After dinner on the drive home, Sophie fell asleep in the back seat. Victoria reached over and laced her fingers through Caleb's. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me be part of this. Your life. Sophie's life. I know it wasn't easy, bringing someone into what you've built." "You made it easy," Caleb said. "You showed up scared and did it anyway. That's all I needed. I'm still scared sometimes. That I'll mess this up. That I'll revert to being the Ice Queen CEO who doesn't know how to be human." "Then I'll remind you. That's what we do. We remind each other we're allowed to be human." Victoria smiled and squeezed his hand. They drove in comfortable silence until Caleb pulled into his driveway. Victoria helped him carry Sophie inside and up to her bedroom. The kid didn't even wake up when Caleb got her into pajamas and tucked her into bed. Downstairs, Victoria lingered near the door like she wasn't sure whether leaving or staying was appropriate. "You can stay," Caleb said, "if you want, just to talk, or watch TV, or sit in the same room and exist." "I want to stay," Victoria admitted, "but I have an early meeting." "You always have an early meeting." "Fair point." She smiled. "Okay, I'll stay for a bit." They ended up on the couch with terrible late-night television playing in the background, Victoria's head resting on Caleb's shoulder, his arm around her waist. It was domestic and ordinary, and exactly what Caleb hadn't known he needed. "Can I ask you something?" Victoria said eventually. "Always. When we were in the elevator, you said you felt alive for the first time in 3 years. Do you still feel that way?" Caleb thought about it. "I feel like I'm building something instead of just surviving. Like there's a future that isn't just getting through another day." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Yeah, I still feel that way." "Good, because I feel it too. And it's terrifying and wonderful, and I don't want it to stop." "Then don't let it." "I'm not good at this, Caleb. At being vulnerable. At trusting people. At letting someone see the parts of me I've spent years hiding." "I know, but you're trying. That's what matters." Victoria tilted her head up to look at him. "What if I fail? What if I hurt you or Sophie because I don't know how to do this right? Then we'll figure it out together. That's what people do when they care about each other. They screw up and apologize and try to do better next time." "That sounds exhausting." "It is, but it's also worth it." Victoria kissed him then, slow and certain and full of promise. When they broke apart, she was smiling. "I should go," she said, "before I fall asleep on your couch and Sophie finds me here in the morning with a million questions." "She's going to have questions anyway." "True, but I'd prefer to answer them when I'm not wearing yesterday's clothes." Caleb walked her to the door. They stood in the doorway like teenagers, neither wanting to be the first to leave. "Monday?" Victoria said. "First day as operations manager. You ready?" "Absolutely not." "Good. That means you'll be careful and thoughtful instead of overconfident." She kissed him one more time. "I'll see you at the office. Try not to challenge any more company policies on your first day. No promises." "I'm serious, Caleb." "So am I, but I'll try." She left, and Caleb closed the door, feeling like his life had finally aligned into something that made sense. It wasn't perfect. There would be complications and conflicts and moments where they'd have to figure out how to balance professional and personal. But they'd do it together, which made all the difference. Upstairs, Sophie was still asleep, peaceful and secure in a way that made Caleb's heart hurt with love. He'd spent 3 years trying to be enough for her. Now he was learning that maybe being enough meant letting other people in, building a life that was bigger than just survival. Monday arrived faster than Caleb expected. His first day as warehouse operations manager involved meetings, paperwork, and a lot of people congratulating him while carefully not mentioning the fraud investigation. Victoria maintained perfect professional distance, called him Mr. Mercer in front of others, treated him exactly like any other manager, gave no indication they were anything beyond colleagues. But when she passed him in the hallway between meetings, she caught his eye and smiled, and Caleb felt the warmth of it carry him through the rest of the day. Weeks passed, then months. Caleb settled into his new role and discovered he was actually good at management when he wasn't constantly exhausted. The salary increase meant he could cut back on overtime, which meant more time with Sophie, more time with Victoria. They fell into a rhythm, dinners twice a week, sometimes at restaurants, more often at Caleb's house with Sophie. Weekends when Victoria would show up with coffee, and they'd spend mornings doing absolutely nothing productive while Sophie built elaborate rock displays or read her way through entire book series. Victoria still worked too much, still struggled with vulnerability, still occasionally reverted to Ice Queen CEO mode when she was stressed. But she was trying, and Caleb learned to recognize when she needed space versus when she needed someone to remind her it was okay to be human. 6 months after the elevator, Victoria showed up at Caleb's house on a Saturday morning with an unusual request. "I want to take you and Sophie somewhere," she said. "Okay. Where?" "Barrian." "Whoa. It's a surprise, but you'll need to pack overnight bags. We'll be gone until tomorrow evening." Sophie appeared in the doorway, already suspicious. "What kind of surprise?" "The good kind," Victoria promised. "Trust me?" Sophie looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at Victoria. They both shrugged and started packing. The surprise turned out to be a cabin in the mountains, 2 hours outside the city, surrounded by trees and quiet. Victoria had rented it for the weekend with the explicit purpose of forcing all three of them to disconnect from work and school and obligations. "No phones except for emergencies," she announced as they pulled up to the cabin. "No email, no work calls, no thinking about anything except being here." Sophie loved it immediately, ran around the property finding rocks and interesting sticks while Caleb and Victoria unloaded the car. Inside, the cabin was rustic but comfortable. Fireplace, full kitchen, big windows overlooking the forest. "This is nice," Caleb said, pulling Victoria into a hug. "What brought this on?" Bam. "I realized I've been working 60-hour weeks again, missing dinners, canceling plans." Victoria leaned into him. "I don't want to be that person. The one who's so focused on the company that I forget what actually matters. You're not that person." "I could be, easily. It's what I know." She looked up at him. "But I'm trying to learn something different, something better." They spent the weekend hiking and playing board games and cooking meals together that turned out mediocre but tasted amazing because they'd made them as a team. Sophie taught Victoria how to skip stones on the lake behind the cabin. Victoria taught Sophie about constellations. Caleb watched them and felt grateful in a way that made his chest ache. On Sunday evening, as they packed up to leave, Sophie hugged Victoria tight. "Can we do this again?" she asked. "Come back here?" "Absolutely," Victoria said. "Anytime you want." "Good, because I like having you around. You make Dad happy." Victoria's eyes got suspiciously bright. "He makes me happy too." The drive back to the city was quiet, all three of them tired in the best way. Sophie fell asleep in the back seat again, her standard move on any drive longer than 30 minutes. Victoria reached over and took Caleb's hand. "I love you," she said quietly. "I don't know if I've actually said that out loud yet, but I do. I love you and Sophie and the life we're building together." Caleb's throat tightened. "I love you too. Even when you work too much and forget to eat lunch and try to manage emotions like they're quarterly reports. Especially then?" "Especially then." They got back to Caleb's house late. Victoria helped carry Sophie inside and stayed while Caleb got her into bed. Then they sat on the couch together, exhausted and content. "I've been thinking," Victoria said, "about the future, about what I want. And I want this. You and Sophie and Sunday mornings and family dinners and someone who reminds me I'm human when I forget." She turned to face him fully. "I want to build something real with you, Caleb. Not just dating, not just figuring it out as we go. Something permanent." Caleb's heart rate kicked up.
Are you asking what I think you're asking?
I'm asking if you'd be open to the idea. Eventually, when the timing's right and Sophie's ready and we've figured out more of the complicated parts. Victoria looked nervous, genuinely nervous in a way Caleb rarely saw. I know it's fast. I know we're still learning each other. But when I think about my future, you're in it, both of you.
Victoria Sinclair, Caleb said slowly. Are you telling me you want to get married someday? Someday. Yes. If you want that too, yeah.
Caleb pulled her close and kissed her thoroughly. When they broke apart, he was grinning. I want that, someday. When we've figured out more of the mess, and Sophie's ready, and you've learned to take actual lunch breaks. I'm working on the lunch breaks. I've noticed. You've been eating real food at least 3 times a week now. Don't push it. What? They sat together in the quiet house, planning a future that felt both impossible and inevitable. A year ago, Caleb had been surviving, barely holding it together, convinced that his life was small and controlled and predictable. Then a storm had trapped him in an elevator with the last person he'd expected to matter. And everything had changed. 8 months later, on a warm autumn evening, Caleb brought Victoria back to the rooftop restaurant where their disastrous blind date had started. The building had been repaired after the storm damage. The view was just as spectacular as he remembered. They stood near the windows where they'd argued before everything went wrong, where Victoria had grabbed his arm and pulled him towards safety when glass started breaking. Why here? Victoria asked. Because this is where it started, where we were forced to stop pretending we didn't see each other. Caleb took her hand. And because I wanted to rewrite the memory. Make it about choosing to be here instead of being trapped. That's surprisingly poetic for someone who claims not to be romantic. I have my moments, and Sophie appeared from where she'd been hiding near the entrance with Emma, who'd been in on the plan from the beginning. She was carrying a small box and grinning like she'd just won something. Now? Mo, she asked Caleb. Now, he confirmed. Sophie handed him the box and then positioned herself next to Emma, both of them watching with barely contained excitement. Victoria looked between them, confused. What's happening? Caleb opened the box to reveal a ring, simple, elegant, nothing ostentatious because that wasn't who Victoria was. But the band was platinum, and the stone caught the light beautifully. Victoria Sinclair, he said, you are impossible and terrifying and the best thing that's happened to me since Sophie was born. You make me want to be braver. You remind me that I'm allowed to want things for myself. You love my daughter like she's yours, and you make terrible pancakes on Sunday mornings, and you still work too much, but you're trying to be better. Victoria's hand was shaking in his. I want to spend my life figuring out the complicated parts with you, Caleb continued. I want Sunday mornings and family dinners and someone who challenges me when I'm being stupid. I want to build something permanent with you. So will you marry me? Victoria looked at the ring, then at Caleb, then at Sophie, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling so wide it looked painful. Yes, she said. Yes, absolutely yes. Ayeta. Caleb slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her while Sophie cheered and Emma whooped and the restaurant staff who'd been watching discreetly applauded. When they broke apart, Victoria was laughing and crying at the same time. You planned this with Sophie? She asked. She helped pick the ring, Caleb admitted. Said it needed to be something you'd actually wear instead of something fancy you'd be afraid to damage. She was right. Victoria looked at Sophie. Come here. Well, Sophie ran over and Victoria pulled her into a hug that lasted long enough that Caleb's eyes got suspiciously wet too. I love you, Victoria told her. Both of you. So much. I love you too, Sophie said. Does this mean you're going to be my mom now? Victoria's breath caught. If that's okay with you. It's definitely okay. I've wanted a mom forever, and you're the best one I could have asked for. They stood there together, Caleb and Victoria and Sophie, while the city lights glittered below them and the sky stayed clear and calm. No storm, no emergency. Just 3 people choosing each other despite all the reasons it shouldn't work. The wedding happened 6 months later. Small ceremony, close friends and family. Sophie is the maid of honor who took her job incredibly seriously. Emma cried through the entire thing. Victoria's assistant Diane looked smug about the whole situation, claiming she'd known from the start they were perfect for each other.
Victoria moved into Caleb's house because Sophie refused to leave her room and her rock collection. They turned the guest room into an office for Victoria and established rules about work-life balance that Victoria broke regularly, and Caleb called her out on with increasing frequency. It wasn't perfect. They fought about Victoria working late and Caleb being overprotective and whose turn it was to deal with Sophie's math homework. But they figured it out together, which made all the difference. A year after the wedding, Victoria made a major announcement at a company board meeting. She was stepping back from CEO to take a position as Chief Strategy Officer, still involved in the company's direction, but with significantly fewer operational responsibilities. I spent my entire adult life building walls and working 100-hour weeks because I thought that's what success looked like, she told the board. But real success is having time for the people who matter. I'm not interested in being feared anymore. I'm interested in being present. The board approved her transition. The new CEO was someone Victoria had personally mentored. Younger, brilliant, with fresh ideas about how to run the company ethically and efficiently. Caleb got promoted again, this time to VP of Operations. He worked reasonable hours, delegated effectively, and went home for dinner with his family every night. Sophie thrived, made friends easily, joined the science club, started a rock collection blog that somehow got hundreds of followers. She introduced Victoria as her mom without hesitation and never questioned whether she belonged. 2 years after the elevator, Caleb and Victoria took Sophie back to that mountain cabin for a weekend. They hiked and skipped stones and talked about everything and nothing. On Saturday evening, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Sophie asked a question that made both adults pause. "Do you think Mom, my first mom, would have liked Victoria?" Caleb thought about Rachel, about her laugh and her warmth and her absolute certainty that Caleb deserved to be happy. "Yep," he said. "I think she would have loved her, because Victoria makes you happy and takes care of us and reminds me to be brave. And she's teaching me about rocks," Sophie added, "which is important." "Extremely important," Victoria agreed. Sophie nodded, satisfied. Then she went back to her book while Caleb and Victoria sat in comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about that elevator?" Victoria asked eventually. "Sometimes. Usually when we're arguing about something stupid and I need to remember why I put up with you." "I put up with you, you mean?" "We put up with each other." Victoria smiled and leaned against his shoulder. "Best disaster of my life." "Same." "Ooh." They sat there as the sun set over the mountains and the air turned cool, and Sophie eventually fell asleep in her chair with her book still open on her lap. Caleb looked at his family, messy and imperfect and his, and felt grateful for every choice that had led to this moment. Sometimes the person who challenges you the hardest is the one brave enough to rebuild your heart from the ruins. Sometimes getting trapped in an elevator during a thunderstorm is exactly what you need to stop surviving and start living. Sometimes the scariest thing you can do is let someone see you, really see you, and trust that they won't run away. Victoria had learned that being vulnerable wasn't weakness. Caleb had learned that he didn't have to carry everything alone. Sophie had learned that family wasn't just biology. It was choosing each other every day, even when things got hard. And together, they'd learned that perfect was overrated. That real love was messy and complicated and required constant work. But it was also worth every difficult conversation and compromise and moment of doubt. Because in the end, the best things in life aren't the ones that come easily. They're the ones you fight for. The ones you choose despite all the reasons you shouldn't. The ones that terrify you and challenge you and make you better than you thought you could be. Caleb carried Sophie inside when the evening turned cold. Victoria followed, and together they tucked her into bed before heading to their own room. They fell asleep tangled together, safe and warm and home. And if sometimes Caleb still dreamed about that elevator, about darkness and thunder, and the moment Victoria's hand found his, he woke up smiling. Because that disaster had led to this. And he wouldn't change a single thing.